I love you, I love you, I love you. Chapter 1. Playing Pilgrims. As young leaders like to know how people look, we will take this moment to give them a little sketch of the four sisters in the March family who sat knitting away in the twilight, while the December snow fell quietly without, and the fire crackled cheerfully within. It was a comfortable old room. The carpet was faded and the furniture very plain, but there was a good picture or two on the walls, and books filled with recesses, chrysanthemums, and Christmas roses bloomed in the window, and a pleasant atmosphere of home peace invaded it. Margaret, the eldest of the four, was 16, very pretty, being plumping fair with large eyes, plenty of soft brown hair, a sweet mouth, and white hands, of which she was rather vain. 15-year-old Joe was very tall, thin and brown, and reminded one of a colt, for she never seemed to know what to do with her long limbs, which was very much in her way. She had a decided mouth, comical nose, and sharp gray eyes, which appeared to see everything and were by turns fierce, funny, or thoughtful. Her long black hair was her one beauty, but it was usually bundled into a net to be out of her way. Round shoulders had Joe, big hands and feet, a flyaway look to her clothes, and the uncomfortable appearance of a girl who was rapidly shooting up into a woman, and didn't like it. Elizabeth, or Beth, as everyone called her, was a rosy, smooth-haired, bright-eyed girl of 13 with a shy manner, timid voice, and a peaceful expression which was seldom disturbed. Father called her Little Tranquility, and the name suited her excellently, for she seemed to live in a happy world of her own, only venturing out to meet the few whom she trusted and loved. Amy, although the youngest, was a most important person, in her own opinion at least, a regular snow maiden with blue eyes and yellow hair curling onto her shoulder, pale and slender, and always carrying herself like a young lady, mindful of her manners. What the characters of the four sisters were, we will leave to be found out. Oh, Christmas won't be Christmas without any presents. I know it's so dreadful to be poor. I don't think it's fair for some girls to have lots of pretty things, and other girls nothing at all. Oh, we've got father and mother in each other anyhow. That's not true. We haven't got father, and shan't have him for a long time. You know the reason mother proposed not having any presents this Christmas was because it's going to be a hard winter for everyone, and she thought we ought not to spend money for pleasure when our men are suffering. So in the army we can't do much, but we can make our little sacrifices, and ought to do it gladly. But I don't think the little that we could send would do any good. We've each got $1, and the army wouldn't be very much helped by our giving. That I agree not to expect anything from mother or you, but I do want to buy some of the latest European novels. For myself, I plan to spend mine on your music. I wanted a nice box of favors. Drawing pencils, I really need them. Mother didn't say anything about our money. She won't wish us to give up everything. Let's each buy what we want and have a little fun. I'm sure we grub hard enough to earn it. I know I do. Teaching those dreadful children nearly all day, when I'm longing to enjoy myself at home. Oh, you don't have half such a hard time as I do. How would you like to be shut up for hours with rich Aunt March, eh? Nervous, fussy old lady who is never satisfied and worries you till you're ready to fly out of the window or box her ears. It's naughty to fret, but I do think washing dishes and keeping things tidy is the worst work in the world. My hands get so stiff I can't practice. I don't believe any of you suffers as I do, for you don't have to go to school with him. Pertinent girls who plague you if you don't know your lesson and laugh at your dresses and label your father if he isn't rich and insult you when your nose isn't nice. 6 Mommy will be home soon. Put her slippers to warm in front of the fire. But we're all thinking about ourselves, not about her. And yet she deserves a present more than any of us. You're right. I shall use my dollar to give her a nice pair of gloves, and I some handkerchiefs all hemmed. Army shoes the best to be had. I'll get a little bottle of cologne. She likes it, and it won't cost much. So I'll have some left to buy something for me. But when shall we buy them? There's still lots to do about the Christmas play. Then we ought to rehearse tonight. Come here, Amy. We must do the fainting scene. You're as stiff as a poker in that. I can't help it. I never saw anyone faint. And I don't choose to make myself all black and blue. Now every year, Joe wrote and presented a play to be acted out on Christmas Eve. You're a regular Shakespeare. Not quite though. I do think The Witch's Curse and operatic tragedy is a rather nice thing. Although I'd like to try Macbeth, if only we had a trap door for Banquo. I always wanted to do the killing part. Is that a dagger I see before me? No, it's a toasting fork with Marmee slipper on it. Instead of the bread, I'm glad to find you so merry, my girls. Marmee, or Mrs. March, was a stout motherly lady with a. Can I help you look about her? Which was truly delightful. She wasn't a particularly handsome person, but mothers are always lovely to their children. And the girls thought the gray cloak and unfashionable bonnet covered the most splendid woman in the world. Well, dearies, how have you got on today? Has anyone called Beth? How was your cold, Meg Joe? You look tired to death. Come and kiss me, baby, while making these maternal inquiries, Mrs. March got her wet things off, her hot slippers on, and sitting down in the easy chair, drew Amy onto her lap, preparing to enjoy the happiest hour of a busy day. The girls flew about trying to make things comfortable. Each in her own way, Meg arranged the tea table. Joe brought wood and set chairs dropping, overturning, clattering everything she touched. Beth trotted to and fro with hot biscuits between parlor and kitchen, quiet and busy while Amy gave directions to everyone as she sat with her hands folded. I've got a treat for you after supper. A quick, bright smile went round like a streak of sunshine. Beth clapped her hands, regardless of the hot biscuit she was carrying, and Joe tossed her napkin in the ear. A letter, 3 cheers for father, yes. A nice long letter he is well, and thinks he shall get through the cold season better than we feared. He sends all sorts of loving wishes for Christmas. I think it was so splendid of father to go as a chaplain when he was too old to be drafted and not strong enough to be a soldier. I wish I could go as a drummer so I could be near and help him. It must be very disagreeable to sleep in a tent and eat all sorts of bad tasting things and drink out of a tin mug. When will he come home, Army? Not for many months, dear, unless he is sick. He will stay and do his work faithfully as long as he can, and we won't ask him back a minute sooner than he can be spared. Now come here and hear the letter. They all drew up to the fire, mother in the big chair, with Meg and Amy perched on either arm of it, and Joe leaning on the back, where no one might see any sign of emotion should the letter happen to be touching. But in this one, little was said of the hardships endured, the dangers faced, or the homesickness conquered. It was a cheerful, hopeful letter, and only at the end did the writer's heart overflow with fatherly love and longing for home. I know they will be loving children to you, will do their duty faithfully, fight their bosom enemies bravely, and comport themselves so beautifully that when I come back to them, I may be fonder and prouder than ever of my little women. Everybody sniffed when they came to that part. Joe wasn't ashamed of the great tear that dropped off the end of her nose, and Amy never minded the rumbling of her curls as she hid her face on her mother's shoulder and sobbed. I am a selfish pig, but will try to be better, so that father may not be disappointed in me. Do you remember how you used to play Pilgrim's Progress when you were little things? Nothing delighted you more than to have me tie bags of burden on your backs, give you hats and sticks and rolls of paper, and let you travel through the house from the cellar, which was the city of destruction up to the housetop, where you had all the lovely things you could collect to make the celestial city. What fun it was going by the lions, fighting Napoleon, and passing through the valley with the hobgoblins. Or my favorite part was when we came out on the flat roof, where flowers and arbors and pretty things were, and all stood and sung for joy. Up there in the sunshine, I don't remember much about it, except that I was afraid of the cellar in the dark entry, and always liked the cake and milk we had up at the top. If I wasn't too old for such things, I'd rather like to play it over again. We are never too old for this, my dear, because it is a play we are playing all the time. In one way or another, our burdens are here. Our road is before us, and the longing for goodness and happiness is the guide that leads us through many troubles and mistakes to the peace which is a true celestial city. Now, my little pilgrims, suppose you begin again, not in play, but in earnest, and see how far on you can get before Father comes home. Really, Mother, where are our bundles, each of you told what your burden is just now? Except this, I rather think she hasn't got any. Yes, I have, minus dishes and dusters, and envying girls with nice pianos, and being afraid of people. Let us do it, for it is only another name for trying to be good. And the story may help us, although we do want to be good. It's hard work and we forget and don't do our best. They were in the slough of despond tonight, and Mother came and pulled us out, as Help did in the book. We ought to have our roll of directions. And like Christian, what should we do about that? Look under your pillows Christmas morning, and you will find your guidebook. What the hell, in a dark man style joyful. Holy nations rise, joy, much wild love, that skies when the child becomes proclaimed. Yeah. Chapter to a Merry Christmas. Joe was the first awake. In the dawn of Christmas morning, no stockings hung at the fireplace, and for a moment, she felt as much disappointment as she did long ago, when the little sock fell down, because it was so crammed with goodies. Then she remembered her mother's promise, and slipping her hand under her pillow, drew out a little crimson-covered book. She knew it very well, for it was that beautiful, old story of the best life ever lived, and Joe felt that it was a true guidebook for any pilgrim going on a long journey. Meg, she woke Meg with a Merry Christmas, and bade her see what was under her pillow. A green-covered book appeared, with the same picture inside, and a few words written by their mother, which made their one present very precious in their eyes. Presently, Bethany and me woke to rummage and find their little books also. One dove-colored, the other blue, and all sat looking at and talking about them, while the east grew rosy with the coming day. In spite of her small vanities, Meg had a sweet and pious nature, which unconsciously influenced her sisters, especially Joe, who loved her very tenderly and obeyed her, because her advice was so gently given. Girls, Mother wants us to read and love and mind these books, and we must begin at once. We used to be faithful about it, but since Father went away, and all this war trouble and settled we have neglected many things. You can do as you please, but I shall keep my book on the table here, and read a little every morning as soon as I wake, for I know it will do me good and help me through the day. That was Mommy's intention, certainly, but where is she? Goodness only knows. Some poor critter come a-begging, and your ma went straight off to see what was needed. Hannah had lived with a family since Meg was born, and was considered by them all more as a friend than a servant. There never was such a woman for giving away food and drink and clues. She will be back soon, I guess. So let's have everything ready. Where are the presents in the basket under the sofa? And Amy, here I am, and what have you got there? Don't laugh at me. I changed the little bottle for a big one, and I gave all my money to get it, and I'm truly trying not to be selfish anymore. As she spoke, Amy showed the handsome flask, which replaced the cheap one and looked so earnest and humble. Joe pronounced her a trump while Beth ran to the window and picked her finest roses as ornaments to the stately bottle. You see, I felt ashamed of my present after reading and talking about being good. So I ran around the corner and changed it the minute I was up. And I'm so glad for mine as a handsomest present now. That's... Marmee quick put the bottle under the sofa, together with the other presents. Merry Christmas, daughters. Merry Christmas, Marty. Lots of them thank you for her books. We read some mean to you every day. I'm glad you began on your books at once and hope you will keep on. But I want to say one word before we sit down. Not far from here lies a poor woman with a newborn baby. 6 children, huddling to one bed to keep them from freezing. For they have no fire, and there's nothing to eat over there. My girls, will you give them your breakfast? As a Christmas present, the sisters were all unusually hungry, having been waiting for nearly an hour. And for a minute no one spoke, only a minute though. For Joe proclaimed impetuously, I'm so glad you came before we began. May I go and help carry the things to the poor? Little children, oh, I thought you'd do it, you shall all. Go and help me ... and when we come back, we will have bread and milk for breakfast and make it up at dinner time. They were soon ready and the procession set out, fortunately. It was early and they went through Backstreet, so few people saw them. And no one laughed at the funny party. Poor bear. Miserable room, it was with broken windows, no fire, ragged bedclothes. A sick mother, a wailing baby, and a group of pale, hungry children, cuddled under one old quilt, trying to keep warm. Oh, my God, it is good. Angels come to us, funny angels and hoods and mittens, in a few minutes. It really did seem as if kind spirits had been at work here. Hannah, who had carried wood, made a fire and stopped at the broken panes. With old hats and her own cloak, Mrs. March gave the mother tea and gruel, and comforted her with promises of help ... as she dressed the baby as tenderly as if it had been her own. The girls, meantime, spread the table, set the children round the fire, and fed them like so many hungry birds, laughing, talking and trying to understand the funny, broken English. Does he scooter to anger kinder? The girls had never been called angel children before and thought it was very agreeable. There was a very happy breakfast that they didn't get any of it. But when they went away leaving comfort behind, I think they were not in the city for merrier people than the hungry little sisters who gave away their breakfast and contented themselves with bread and milk on a Christmas morning. That's loving our neighbor better than ourselves. And I like it. Back at home while their mother was upstairs, collecting clothes for the poor Hummels, the girls set out the presents from Marmee. It was not a very splendid show, but there was a great deal of love done up in the few little bundles, and the tall vase of red roses, white chrysanthemums, and trailing vines which stood in the middle, giving quite an elegant air to the table. She's coming, strike up ... Beth, the door, I've got it. As Meg escorted her with great dignity, Mrs. March was both surprised and touched. She smiled with her eyes as she examined her presents, and read the little notes which accompanied them. The slippers went on at once. A new handkerchief was slipped into a pocket. Well scented with Amy's cologne, the rose was fastened in the bosom, and the nice glove pronounced a perfect fit. There was a good deal of laughing and explaining, in the simple, loving fashion which makes these home festivals so pleasant, at the time so sweet to remember long afterward. The rest of the day was devoted to preparations for the evening, festivity being still too young to go off into the theater, and not rich enough to afford any great outlay. For their private performances, the girls put their wits to work, and necessity being the mother of invention, made whatever they needed. There were pasteboard guitars, antique lamps made of old-fashioned butter, boats covered with silver paper, gorgeous robes of old cotton, glittering with tin spangles from a pickle factor, and armor covered with the same useful, diamond-shaped bits. The furniture was used to being turned topsy-turvy, and the big chamber was the scene of many innocent rebels. No gentlemen were admitted, so Jo played male parts to her heart's content, and took immense satisfaction in a pair of russet leather boots given her by a friend who knew a lady who knew an actor. These boots were accompanied by an old foil and a slash doublet once used by an artist for some picture. The smallness of the company made it necessary for the two principal actors to take several parts of piece, and they certainly deserve some credit for the hard work they did. Hey there, hey there. From Nine Home, no, that's me, no. It's not look hero. On Christmas night, a dozen neighboring girls piled onto the bed, which was the dress circle, and sat before the blue and yellow chintz curtains in a most flattering state of expectancy. There was a good deal of rustling and whispering. Behind the curtain, a trifle of lamp smoke and an occasional giggle from Amy was apt to get hysterical. In the excitement of the moment, presently a bell sounded. The curtains flew apart and the operatic tragedy began. A gloomy wood, according to the one play bill, was represented by a few shrubs in pots, green baize on the floor, and a cave in the distance. This cave was made with a clothes horse for roof, bureau for walls, and in it was a small furnace, full blast ... with a black pot on it, and an old witch bending over. Thy home, airy sprite, I bid thee come. The stage was dark, and the glow of the furnace had a fine effect, especially as real steam issued from the kettle when the witch took off the cover. A moment was allowed for the first thrill to subside. That Hugo, the villain, stalked in with a clanking sword at his side. Slouched, had a black beard, mysterious cloak, and the boots. After pacing to and fro in much agitation, he struck his forehead and then burst out in a wild strain, singing of his hatred for Rodrigo, his love for Zara, and his pleasing resolution to kill the one and win the other. The gruff tones of Hugo's voice, with an occasional shout, and his feelings overcame him, were very impressive, and the audience applauded the moment he paused for breath. Bowing with the air of one accustomed to public praise, he stole to the cavern and ordered Hagar to come forth. What, O minion, I need thee. Out came Meg, with gray horse hair hanging about her face, a red and black robe, a star and cabalistic signs upon her cloak. Hugo demanded a potion to make Zara adore him, and one to destroy Rodrigo. Thou shalt have both, thou wicked one. Bring me here with elfin speed the fragrant philtre which I need. Make it sweet and swift and strong spirit. Answer now my song. From the back of the cave appeared a little figure in cloudy white, with glittering wings, golden hair, a garland of roses on its head, and Amy's characteristic giggle, waving a wand. It dropped a small gilded bottle at the witch's feet, and then vanished giggling again, followed by Hugo. So listen, all, and listen well. There are now unseen truths to tell. Hagar informed the audience that as Hugo had killed a few of her friends in times past, she had cursed him and intends to thwart his plans and be revenged upon him. Then the curtain fell, and the audience were posed and ate candy ... while discussing the merits of the play. A good deal of hammering went on before the curtain rose again, but when it became evident what a masterpiece of stage carpentry had been, got up. No one murmured at the delay. It was truly superb. A tower rose to the ceiling. Halfway up appeared a window with a lamp burning at it. Behind the white curtain appeared Zara, in a lovely blue and silver dress, waiting for Rodrigo. He came in a glorious array with a plumed cap, red cloak, chestnut lovelocks, guitar, and of course the boots. Kneeling at the foot of the tower, he sang a serenade, and his last with a hey and a ho and a hey. Nani no, to which Zara replied in the spring. Then came the grand effect of the play. Rodrigo produced a rope ladder with 5 steps on it, threw up one end and invited Zara to descend. Timidly she crept from her lattice, put her hand on Rodrigo's shoulder, and was about to leap gracefully down when her train caught in the window. The tower tottered, leaned forward, fell with a crash, and buried the unhappy lovers in the room. A universal shriek arose as the russet boots waved wildly from the wreck, and eventually a golden head emerged. "I told you so, I told you the dress was too long." However, with a wonderful presence of mind, Don Pedro, Zara's cruel father, who had not as yet appeared in the play, approached the boots and banned Rodrigo from his kingdom. Decidedly shaken by the fall of the tower, Rodrigo defied the old gentleman and refused to stir, which, as he was also an acting Don Pedro, he couldn't. This dauntless example fired Zara. She also defied her sire, so he ordered them both to the deepest dungeons of the castle. The third act was the castle hall, and here Hagar appeared, having come to free the lovers and finish Hugo. She hears him coming and hides, then sees him. Put the poison potions into 2 cups of wine. And bid a timid little servant bear these to the captives in their cells and tell them, "I shall come unknown." The servant takes Hugo aside to tell him something, and Hagar changes the cups for 2 others, which are harmless. Then Hagar reappears and puts back the cup, which holds the poison. Hugo, getting thirsty after a long warble, drinks it, loses his wits, and after a good deal of clutching and stamping, falls flat and dies, while Hagar, in a song of exquisite power and melody, informs him what she has done. This was a truly thrilling scene, though some persons might have thought that the sudden tumbling down of a quantity of long hair rather marred the effect of the villain's death. He was called before the curtain, and with great propriety appeared leading Hagar, whose singing was considered more wonderful than all the rest of performance put together. The tumultuous applause which followed, however, received an unexpected check, for the cot bed on which the dress circle was built suddenly shut up, extinguishing the enthusiastic audience. All were taken out unhurt, though many were speechless with laughter. "Is this part of the player stepping on my face?" The cops collapsed the grand circle. "You mean, come on, the show must go on." The excitement had hardly subsided when Hannah appeared and asked at Mrs. Marsh's request would the ladies walk down to supper. What they beheld was a surprise even to the actors, and when they saw the table, they looked at one another in rapturous amazement. It was just like Marmee to get up, a little treat for them. But anything so fine as this was unheard of since the departed days of plenty. There was ice cream, actually 2 dishes of it, pink and white, and cake and fruit, and distracting French bonbons in the middle of the table. All great bouquets of hothouse flowers. It quite took their breath away. And they stared first at the table, then at their mother, who looked as if she enjoyed it immensely. "Is it fairies? It's Santa Claus, mother. Did it not? I know. Our mean Aunt March had a good fit and sent the supper." "You're all wrong. Old Mr. Lawrence sent it." "The Lawrence boy's grandfather. What in the world put such a thing into his head? We don't know him." "You mean the people who live in the big house next door, don't you?" Hannah told one of his servants about your breakfast parties. "He's an odd old gentleman, but that pleased him. He knew my father years ago, and he sent me a polite note this afternoon, saying he hoped I would allow him to express his friendly feelings towards my children by sending them a few trifles in honor of the day. I could not refuse, and so you have a little feast at night to make up for the bread and milk breakfast. I've heard that old Mr. Lawrence is very proud and doesn't like to mix with his neighbors. He keeps his grandson shut up when he isn't riding or walking with his tutor, and makes him study dreadfully hard. That boy put it into his head. I know he did. He's a capital fellow, and I wish we could get acquainted. It Looks as if he'd like to know us ... but Meg is so prim. She won't let me speak to him when we pass. Our cat ran away once and he brought her back. And we talked over the fence, and we're getting on capitally. All about cricket and so on, when he saw Meg coming and walked off. I mean to know him someday ... for he needs fun, I'm sure he does. I like his manners and he looks like a little gentleman. So I have no objection to your knowing him. If a proper opportunity comes, he brought the flowers himself. And I should have asked him in, if I've been sure what was going on upstairs. He looked so wistful as he went away, hearing the frolic and evidently having none of his own. Oh, it's a mercy you didn't, Mother, but we'll have another place sometime which he can see. Maybe he'll help us act, wouldn't that be jolly? I've never had a bouquet before. How pretty it is they are. Lovely, but Beth's roses are sweeter to me. Beth nestled up to her mother and whispered softly, I wish I could send my bunched father. I'm afraid he isn't having such a Merry Christmas as we are. Chapter 3 The Lawrence Boy, Jojo. Where are you? Where do you think? Up here. The garret was Jo's favorite refuge. She loved to retire here, with half a dozen apples and a nice book, to enjoy the quiet and the society of a pet rat, who lived nearby and didn't mind her a particle. As Meg appeared, the rat whisked into his hole. Such fun, only see. What is it, an invitation from Mrs. Gardner for tomorrow night? Look. Mrs. Gardner would be happy to see Miss March and Miss Josephine at a little dance on New Year's Eve. Marmee is willing we should go now. What shall we wear? What's the use of asking that? You know we shall wear our poplans, because we haven't got anything else. If only I had a silk. Mother says I may when I'm 18. But 2 years is an everlasting time to wait. I'm sure our pops look like silk anyway. They are nice enough for us. Yours is as good as new. But I forgot the burn and tear in mine. Whatever shall I do? The burn shows horribly, and I can't take any more out. You must sit still all you can ... and keep your back out of sight. I shall have a new ribbon in my hair, and Marmee will lend me her little pearl pin. And my slippers are lovely. My gloves will do, though they aren't as nice as I'd like. Mine are spoiled with lemonade, and I can't get any new ones, so I shall have to go without. You must have gloves or I won't go. Gloves are more important than anything else. You can't dance without them. And if you don't, I should be so mortified. Then I shall stay still. I don't care much for company dancing. It's no fun to go sailing around. I prefer to fly about and cut capers. You can't ask Marmee for new ones. They are so expensive. Are you sure you can't fix them? I can hold them scrunched up in my hands, so no one will know how stained they are. Or I'll tell you how we can manage each. Wear one good one and carry the other. Your hands are bigger than mine, and you will stretch my glove dreadfully. Then I'll go without. I don't care what people say. No. You may have it. Only don't stain it, and do behave nicely. Don't put your hands behind you or stare or say, Christopher Columbus, will you? Don't worry about me. I'll be as prim as a dish and not get into any scrapes. If I can help it now, go and answer your note. And let me finish the splendid story. On New Year's Eve the parlor was deserted, for the 2 younger girls played dressing maids ... and the 2 elder were absorbed in the all-important business of getting ready for the party. Simple as the toilets were, there was a great deal of running up and down, laughing and talking, and at one time a strong smell of burnt hair pervaded the house. Meg wanted a few curls about the face, and Jo undertook to pinch the papered locks with a pair of hot tongs. Aren't they to smoke like that? It's the dampness drying. It smells like burned feathers there. Now I'll take off the papers, and you'll see a cloud of little ringlets. She did take off the papers, but no cloud of ringlets appeared, for the hair came with the papers, and the horrified hairdresser laid a row of little scorched bundles on the bureau. Oh, what have you done? You spoiled my hair. Now I can't go my hair. Just my luck you shouldn't have asked me to do it. I always spoil everything. I'm so sorry. But the tongs were too hot and so I made a mess. It isn't spoiled, just frizzle it. And tie your ribbon so the ends come on your forehead. He will look like the latest fashion. I've seen lots of girls doing. So serves me right for trying to be fine. Oh, I wish I'd let my hair alone. After various lesser mishaps, Meg was finished at last. And by the united exertions of the family. Jo's hair was got up and her dress on. They look very well in there. Simple suits, Meg in her silvery drab with a blue velvet snood, lace frills and the pearl pin, Jo in maroon with a stiff, gentlemanly linen collar and a white chrysanthemum. Order for her only ornament, each put on one nice light glove, and carried one soiled one in all. Pronounce the effect quite easy and nice. Have a good time, dearies. Don't eat too much supper and come away at 11. When I send Hannah for you, is my sash right? Does my hair look very bad? If you see me doing anything wrong, you just remind me by a wink, will you know? Winking isn't ladylike. I'll lift my eyebrows if anything is wrong. And not if you're all right. Now hold your shoulders straight and take short steps. And don't shake hands if you're introduced to anyone. It isn't the thing. How do you learn all the proper ways? I never can, isn't the music game. Ah, the delightful Miss Marsh. Jo is it, and Meg and Jo. Of course, and how was your mother? Very well, thank you. She sends her regards, excellent. Now who can I introduce you to? Yes, of course, Sally. Sally, dear Meg. How are you? Meg knew Sally, the oldest of Mrs. Gardner's daughters. But Jo, who didn't care for girlish gossip, stood with her back carefully against the wall and felt as much out of place as a colt. And flower garden, half a dozen jovial lads, were talking about skates and another part of the room. And she longed to go and join them, for skating was one of the joys of her life. She telegraphed her wish to Meg. But the eyebrows went up so alarmingly that she dared not stir. No one came to talk to her. And one by one the group nearest her drifted away. So she stared at people, rather forlornly, till the dancing began. Meg was asked at once, and the tight slippers skipped about so briskly, no one would have guessed the pain their wearer suffered. Smilingly, Jo saw a big red-headed youth approaching her corner, and fearing he meant to engage her, slipped into a curtain recess, intending to peep and enjoy herself in peace. Unfortunately, another bashful person had chosen the same refuge. As the curtain fell behind her, she found herself face to face with the Lawrence boy. Oh dear me, I didn't know anyone was in here. Oh, don't mind me. Stay if you like. Shouldn't I disturb you? Not a bit. I only came here because I didn't know many people and felt rather strange at first. So did I. Don't go away, please, unless you'd rather. The boy sat down again and looked at his boots, until Jo said, trying to be polite and easy, I think I had the pleasure of seeing you before. You live near us, don't you? Next door. We chatted about cricket when I brought your cat home. Oh, we did have such a good time over your nice Christmas present. Grandpa sent it, but you put it into his head, didn't you now? Well, how was your cat, Miss March? Nicely, thank you. Mr. Lawrence, but I'm not Miss March. I'm only Jo. I'm not Mr. Lawrence. I'm only Laurie Lawrence. What an odd name. My first name is Theodore, but I don't like it, for the fellows called me Dora, so I made them say Laurie instead. I hate my name too. It's so sentimental. I wish everyone would say Jo. How did you make the boys stop calling you Dora? I thrashed them. I can't thrash Aunt March, so I suppose I shall have to bear it. Don't you like to dance, Miss Jo? I like it well enough, if there's plenty of room and everyone is lively. In a place like this, I'm sure to upset something, tread on people's toes, or do something dreadful, so I keep out of mischief and let Meg do the pretty. Don't you dance sometimes? You see, I've been abroad a good many years and have been about too much to know How you do things here abroad? Oh, tell me about it. I love dearly to hear people describe their travels. Did you go to Paris? We spent last winter there. And I went to school in Vivay. Can you talk French? We weren't allowed to speak anything else at school. Do say some, I can read it, but can't pronounce can. Almost said who's younger Moisel and L.A. Pantofler. Julie, how nicely you do it. Let me see, you said who is the young lady in the pretty slippers, didn't you? We made Mademoiselle, it's my sister Margaret. Then you knew it was. Do you think she's pretty? Yes, she makes me think of the German girls. She looks so fresh and quiet and dances like a lady. Joe quite glowed with pleasure at this boy's praise of her sister and stored up to repeat to Meg. Then both peeped and criticized and chatted till they felt like old acquaintances. Laurie's bashfulness soon wore off, for Joe's gentlemanly demeanor amused him and set him at his ease, and Joe was her old merry self again, because the dress was forgotten. And nobody lifted their eyebrows at her. She liked the Lawrence boy better than ever and took several good looks at him, so that she might describe him to the girls. As they had no brothers, very few male cousins, and boys were almost unknown creatures to them. Curly black hair, brown skin, big black eyes, long nose, nice teeth, little hands and feet. Tall as I am, a very polite boy and altogether jolly. I'll call him Teddy, I think. I wonder how old he is. He was on the tip of Joe's tongue to ask, but she checked herself in time and with unusual tact tried to find out in a roundabout way. I suppose you're going to college soon. Not for 2 or 3 years yet. I won't go before I'm 17 anyway. Aren't you but 15, 16 next month? How I wish I was going to college. You don't sound as though you're looking forward to it. What would you like best? To live in Italy and to enjoy myself in my own way. Oh, that's a splendid poker. Why don't you go and try it? If you will come to. Oh, I can't. For I told Meg I wouldn't because what? Tell never. Well, I have a bad trick of standing before the fire, and so I burn my frogs. I scorched this one, and though it's nicely mended, it shows. And Meg told me to keep still so no one will see it. You may laugh if you want, it's funny, I know. Never mind that, I'll tell you how we can manage. There's a long hall out there, and we can dance grandly, and no one will see us. Please come. Joe thanked him and gladly went, wishing she had to neat gloves. The hall was empty, and they had a grand poker, for Laurie danced well and taught her the German step, which delighted Joe, being full of swing and spring. When the music stopped, they sat down on the stairs to get their breath, and Laurie was in the midst of an account of a student festival at Heidelberg when Meg appeared in search of her sister. She beckoned, and Joe reluctantly followed her into a side room. I sprained my ankle. That stupid high heel turned and gave me a horrid wrench. It aches so I can hardly stand. I don't know how I'll ever get home. I knew you'd hurt your foot with those silly things. I'm sorry, but I don't see what you can do, except get a carriage or stay here all night. I can't have a carriage without it costing ever so much. I dare say I couldn't get one at all, for most people came in their own, and it's a long way to the stable, and no one to send to go and ask for one. I'll go, no indeed, for it's past 10 and as dark as Egypt. I'll rest until Hannah comes, and then do the best I can. I know I'll ask Laurie, he'll go. Mercy. No, don't ask or tell anyone. As soon as supper is over, watch for Hannah and tell me the minute she comes. So Meg reclined, and Joe went blundering away to the dining room, which she found after going first into a china closet, and then opening the door of a room where old Mr. Gardner was taking a little private refreshment, making a dive at the table. She secured the coffee, which she immediately spilled, thereby making the front of her dress as bad as the back. Oh dear, what a blunderbuss I am. Can I help you, oh Laurie? I was trying to get something for Meg, who is very tired, and someone shook me. And here I am in a nice state, May I take it? Oh, thank you. I'll show you where she is. I'd offer to take it myself, but I should only get into another scrape if I did. Joe led the way, and as if used to waiting on ladies, Laurie drew up a little table, brought a second installment of coffee and ice for Joe, and was so obliging. Even particular Meg pronounced him a nice boy. They had a merry time over bonbons and mottos, and were in the midst of this quiet game of buzz with 2 or 3 other young people who had strayed in when Hannah appeared. Meg forgot her foot and rose so quickly that she was forced to catch hold of Joe. With an exclamation of pain, "It's nothing, Hannah. I turned my foot a little, that's all." Joe decided to take things into her own hands. Slipping out, she ran down and finding a servant, asked if he could help her get a carriage. It happened to be a hired waiter who knew nothing about the neighborhood. And Joe was looking around for help again when Laurie came up and offered his grandfather's carriage, which had just come for him. "So early? You can't mean to go yet?" "I always go early, I do truly. Please let me take you home. It's all on my way, you know, and it's raining." Hannah hated the rain as much as a cat does, so she made no trouble, and they rolled away in the luxurious closed carriage, feeling very festive and elegant. Laurie went on the box so Meg keep her foot up. And the girls talked over their party and freedom. "I saw you dancing with the red-headed man I ran away from. Was he nice?" "Oh, very. His hair is auburn, not red. He was very polite, and I had a delicious polka with him. He looked like a grasshopper, having a fit when he was practicing that new step." Laurie and I couldn't help laughing. "Did you hear us?" "No. But it was very rude." "What are you about?" All that time hidden away there, Joe told her adventures, and by the time she finished, they were at home with many thanks. They said good night and crept in, hoping to disturb no one. But the instant the door creaked open, 2 little nightcaps bobbed up into sleepy but eager voices cried out, "Tell us about the parties, tell us. I declare it really seems like being a fine young lady to come home from a party in my carriage and sit in my dressing gown. With maids to wait on me. I don't believe fine young ladies enjoy themselves a bit more than we do. In spite of our burned hair, old gowns only 1 glove apiece, in tight slippers that sprain our ankles when we are silly enough to wear them. Ha ha ha." Chapter for burdens. The morning after the party, the holidays were over and the sisters had to return to everyday life, each grumbling in her own way as they packed and breakfasted. Life once again seemed to contain all the struggles of their favorite book, A Pilgrim's Progress. How hard it does seem to take up our burdens and go on. I wish it was Christmas or New Year all the time. Wouldn't it be fun? We shouldn't enjoy ourselves half as much as we do now. But it does seem so nice to have suppers and bouquets, and go to parties, and drive home in a carriage and read and rest, and not grubbits like other people, you know, and I always envy girls who do such things. I'm so fond of luxury. Well, we can't have it, so let's not grumble, but shoulder our bundles and trudge along as cheerfully as Mommy does, I'm sure. Aunt Marge is a regular old man of the sea to me, but I suppose when I learn to carry her without complaining, she will tumble off or get so light that I shan't mind her. This idea tickled Joe's fancy. And put her in good spirits, but Meg didn't brighten, for her burden, consisting of 4 spoiled children, seemed heavier than ever. She hadn't heart enough to make herself pretty as usual by putting on a blue neck ribbon and dressing her hair in the most becoming way. Where's the use of looking nice when no one sees me but those cross midgets, and no one cares whether I'm pretty or not? I shall have to toil and moil all my days, with only little bits of fun now and then, and get old and ugly and sour because I'm poor and can't enjoy life as other girls do. What a shame. So Meg went down wearing an injured look. And wasn't it all agreeable? At breakfast time, Beth had a headache and lay on the sofa, trying to console herself. With the cat and 3 kittens, Amy was fretting because her lessons had not been learned. Joe would whistle and make a great racket getting ready. Mrs. March was very busy trying to finish a letter, which must go at once, and Hannah had the grumps because getting up late didn't suit her. "Here girls, here are your muffs." These muffs were actually pies, very comforting to the hands on cold mornings, and Hannah never forgot to make them, no matter how busy or grumpy, for their walks were long and bleak. The poor things got no other lunch and were seldom home before 3. They always looked before turning the corner, for their mother was always at the window to nod and smile and wave her hand to them. Somehow it seemed as if they couldn't have gotten through the day without that, for whatever their mood might be. A last glimpse of that motherly face was sure to affect them like sunshine. If Marmee shook her fist instead of kissing her hand, it would serve us right, for more ungrateful minxes than we are. We're never seen. Don't use such dreadful expressions. I like good strong words that mean something. Call yourself any names you like. I am neither rascal nor a minx, and don't choose to be called so. You're a blighted being, and decidedly cross today, because you can't sit in the lap of luxury all the time, poor dear. Just wait till I make my fortune, and you shall revel in carriages and ice cream, and high-heeled slippers and posies, and red-headed boys to dance. How ridiculous you are, Joe." Joe gave her sister an encouraging pat on the shoulders. They parted, each going a different way, each hugging her little warm turnover, and each trying to be cheerful in spite of the wintry weather and the unsatisfied desires of pleasure-loving youth. When Mr. March lost his property, trying to help an unfortunate friend, the 2 oldest girls begged to be allowed to do something towards their own support, believing that they could not begin too early to cultivate energy, industry, and independence. Their parents consented, and both fell to work with a hearty goodwill, which in spite of all obstacles is sure to succeed. At last, Margaret found a place as a nursery governess. With a small salary, she found poverty harder to bear, because she could remember a time when home was beautiful, life full of ease and pleasure, and want of any kind unknown. She tried not to be envious or discontented, but working for a wealthy family, she daily saw all she wanted. For the children's older sisters were just out, and Meg caught frequent glimpses of dainty ball dresses, heard lively gossip of theaters and concerts, sleighing parties and merrymaking of all kinds, and saw money lavished on trifles, which would have been so precious to her. Poor Meg seldom complained, but a sense of injustice made her feel bitter towards everyone sometimes, for she had not yet learned to know how rich she was in the blessings which alone can make life happy. Joe happened to suit Aunt March, who was lame and needed an active person to wait upon her. The childless old lady had offered to adopt one of the girls when the troubles came, and was very much offended because her offer was declined. Other friends told the Marshs that they had lost all chance of being remembered in the rich old lady's will, but the unworldly Marshs only said, "We can't give up our girls for a dozen fortunes. Rich or poor, we will keep together and be happy in one another." The old lady wouldn't speak to them for a time, but happening to meet Joe at a friend's, something in her manners struck the old lady's fancy, and she proposed to take her as a companion. This did not suit Joe at all, but she accepted the place, since nothing better appeared, and to everyone's surprise, got on remarkably well with her harassable relative. There was an occasional tempest, and once Joe had marched home, declaring that she couldn't bear it any longer. But Aunt March always cleared up quickly and sent for her back again, with such urgency that Joe could not refuse, for in her heart she rather liked the peppery old lady. But the real attraction was a large library of fine books, which was left to dust and spiders since Uncle March died. Joe remember that kind old gentleman who used to let her build railroads and bridges with his big dictionaries, tell her stories about the queer pictures in his Latin books, and buy her cards of gingerbread whenever they met in the street. Lives of the Emperors Tacitus, Gibbon. Decline and fall, these haven't been touched in ages. The dim dusty room, with Bus staring down from the tall bookcases. The cozy chairs, the globes, and best of all the wilderness of books, in which she could wander wherever she liked, made the library a region of bliss to her. The moment Aunt March took a nap, or was busy with company, Jo hurried to this quiet place, and curling herself up in the big chair, devoured poetry, romance, history, travel, and pictures like a regular bookworm. But like all happiness, it did not last long for sure, as she had just reached the heart of the story, the sweetest verse of the song, or the most powerless adventure of a traveler. A shrill voice called Josephine, Josephine, and she had to leave her paradise to whine yarn. Wash the poodle, or read Belgium's moral essays by the hour together. Josephine, Jo's ambition was to do something very splendid. What it was she had no idea, but left it for time to tell. And meanwhile found her greatest affliction in the fact that she couldn't read, run, and write as much as she liked. But the training she received at Aunt Marsh's was just what she needed. The thought that she was doing something to support herself made her happy, in spite of the perpetual Josephine. While in the March household, Amy would be helping Hannah, if helping is the correct word. Fold no, not that way, this way, and fold again. Oh, that cheek's still hot because you've just ironed it, my dear, although if that can be called ironing. For her part, Beth was too bashful to go to school. It had been tried, but she suffered so much that it was given up, and she did her lessons at home with her father, even when he went away, and her mother was called to devote her skill and energy to soldiers' aid societies. Beth went on faithfully by herself and did the best she could. She was a housewifely little creature and helped Hannah keep the home neat and comfortable for the workers, never thinking of any reward but to be loved. Long quiet days she spent, not lonely nor idle, for her little world was peopled with imaginary friends, and she was by nature a busy bee. Death had her troubles, as did all the others. She loved music dearly, but she couldn't take music lessons or have a fine piano. She tried so hard to learn and practiced away so patiently on a jiggly old instrument that it seemed as if someone ought to help. Nobody did, however, and nobody saw Beth when she was all alone, wiping tears off the yellow keys that wouldn't keep in tune. She sung like a little lark about her work. Never was she too tired to play from Army and the girls, and day after day said hopefully to herself, I know I'll get my music sometime if I'm good. Amy had a decided talent for drawing, and was never so happy as when copying flowers, designing fairies, or illustrating stories with queer specimens of art. The teachers complained that instead of doing her sums, she covered her slate with animals. The blank pages of her atlas were used not only to copy maps on, but also caricatures of the most ludicrous description, which came fluttering out of all her books at unlikely moments. She got through her lessons as well as she could, and managed to escape reprimands by being a model of department. She was a great favorite with her mates, being good-tempered and possessing the happy art of pleasing without effort. Amy was in a fair way to being spoiled for. Everyone petted her, and her small vanities and selfishness were growing nicely. One thing, however, rather quenched the vanities. She had to wear her cousin's clothes. Amy suffered deeply at having to wear a red instead of a blue bonnet, unbecoming gowns, and fussy aprons that did not fit. Everything was good, well made, and a little worn. But Amy's artistic instincts were much afflicted, especially this winter. Winter school dress was a dull purple, With yellow dots and no trimming, Meg was Amy's. Confidant and monitor, and by some strange attraction of opposites. Jo was gentle Beth's. To Jo alone did the shy child tell her thoughts. And over her big harum-scarum, Sister Beth unconsciously exercised more influence than anyone in the family. The two older girls meant a great deal to each other, but both took one of the youngsters into their keep and watched over them in their own way. One evening as they sat sewing, "Has anybody got anything to tell? It's been such a dismal day. I'm really dying for amusement. I had a queer time with Aunt today, and as I got the best of it, so I'll tell you about it. I was reading that everlasting bore, Belgium, and drowning away. As I always do for that way, Aunt soon drops off. And then I take out some nice book to read, like fury before she wakes up. But today the exercise actually made me sleepy, and before she began to nod, I gave such a yawn that she asked me, 'What on earth are you doing? What are you trying to swallow that book whole? Number the first. What is it anyway? Well, it's the Vicar of Wakefield. Do you know of the 7 deadly sins? Yes, of course. Well, deceit is the worst of them. Actually, I'm not sure that deceit is actually a sin. Of course, it is to contradict your own aunt. Now I want you to." But even as she began to do whatever she intended, her cat began to bob like a top-heavy dahlia, and I whipped out Vicar of Wakefield again from my pocket, and right away, with one eye on him and the other on Aunt. I just got to where they all tumble into the water, when I forgot myself and laughed out loud, waking and up again, but be more good-natured. After her nap she told me to read a little of the Vicar, and show her the frivolous work I preferred to the worthy and instructive Belgium. Did she own that she liked it? Oh, bless you. No, but she let old Belgium rest, and when I ran back for my gloves this afternoon, she was so hard at the Vicar that she didn't hear me laugh as I danced a jig in the hall because of the good times coming. What a pleasant life she might have if she only chose. But I don't envy her much in spite of her money. After all, rich people have about as many worries as poor ones. I guess I've got something to tell. It isn't like Jo's story, but I thought about it a good deal as I came to the King's today. I found everybody in a flurry. One of the children said that her older brother had done something dreadful. I heard Mrs. King crying and Mr. King talking very loud, and the 2 girls turned away their face when they passed me, so I shouldn't see their red eyes. I didn't ask any questions, but I felt so sorry and was rather glad I hadn't any wild brothers to do wicked things to disgrace the family. I think that being disgraced at school is a great deal, trying more than anything bad boys can do. Susie Perkins came to school today with a lovely red carnelian ring. I wanted it dreadfully and wished I was her with all my might. Well, she drew a picture of Mr. Davis with a monstrous nose and a hump, and the words "Young ladies, my eyes are upon you" coming out of his mouth in a balloon thing. We were laughing over it when all of a sudden his eyes were on us, and he ordered Susie to bring up her slate. She was paralyzed with fright, but she went, and oh dear, what do you think he did? He took her by the ear. Just fancy how horrid, and led her to the recitation platform and made her stand there half an hour, holding that slate so everyone could see. Can the girls laugh at the picture? Laugh not a one. They sat as still as mice. And Susie cried quarts. I didn't envy her then, for I felt that millions of carnelian rings would not have made me happy. After that I saw something that I liked this morning. I meant to tell it at dinner but forgot. When I went to get some oysters for Hannah, Mr. Lawrence was in the fish shop, but he didn't see me for I kept behind a barrel, and he was busy with Mr. Carter, the fishman, and a poor woman came in with a pail and a mop and asked Mr. Carter if he would let her do some scrubbing for a bit of fish, because she hadn't had any dinner for her children and had been disappointed of a day's work but Mr. Carter was in a hurry and said, "Certainly not," and so the woman was going away hungry when Mr. Lawrence hooked up a big fish with the crooked end of his cane and held it out to her. Oh, she was so glad and surprised that she took it right in her arms and thanked him over and over. Until he told her to go along and cook it, she hurried off so happy, hoping that Mr. Lawrence's bed in heaven would be an easy one. She did look so funny hugging that big wet fish. What about you, Marmee? Haven't you a story for us, Mrs.? March began at once with a smile. She had told stories to this little audience for many years and knew how to please them. Once upon a time, there were for girls who had enough to eat and drink, and were a good many comforts and pleasures, kind friends and parents who loved them dearly. And yet they were not content. These girls were anxious to be good, and made many excellent resolutions, but somehow they did not keep them very well, and were constantly saying, "If only we had this, or if only we could do that," quite forgetting how much they already had, and how many pleasant things they could actually do. So they asked an old woman what spell they could use to make them happy. And she said, "When you feel discontented, think over your blessings and be grateful." They decided to try her advice, and soon was surprised to see how well off they were. One discovered that money could not keep shame and sorrow out of rich people's houses. Another thought that though she was poor, she was a great deal happier with her youthful health and spirits than a certain fretful and feeble old lady. A third that disagreeable as it was to help get dinner, yet it was harder still to have to go begging for it. And the fourth, that even a carnelian ring was not so valuable as good behavior. Oh, I like that sort of sermon. It's the sort Father used to tell us we needed that kind of lesson, and we won't forget it. So they agreed to stop complaining, enjoy the blessings they already possessed, and try to deserve them less. They should be taken away entirely instead of increased. And I believe they were never disappointed, nor sorry that they took the old woman's advice. Chapter 5, being neighborly. What in the world are you going to do now, Joe? I'm going out for exercise, I should think. 2 long walks this morning would have been enough. It's cold and dull out, and I would advise you to stay warm and dry by the fire as I do. Not being a pussycat, I can't keep still all day, and I don't like to doze by the fire. I like adventure, and I'm going to go find some somewhere. The snow is lighter now, and with her broom, Joe soon swept a path all around the garden. Now the garden separated the Marsh's house from that of Mr. Lawrence. Both stood in a suburb of the city, which was still country-like with groves and lawns, large gardens and quiet streets. A low hedge separated two estates. On one side was the Marsh's old brown house, looking rather bare and shabby, robbed of the vines that in summer covered its walls and the flowers which then surrounded it. On the other side was a stately stone mansion of the Lawrences, plainly betokening every sort of comfort and luxury. From the big coach house and well-kept grounds to the conservatory and the glimpses of lovely things one caught between the rich curtains. Yet it seemed a lonely, lifeless sort of house. For no children frolicked on the lawn, no motherly face ever smiled at the windows, and few people went in and out, except the old gentleman and his grandson, to Joe's lively fancy. This fine house seemed a kind of enchanted palace, full of splendors and delights which no one enjoyed. She had long wanted to behold the glory, and to know the Lawrence boy, who looked as if he would like to be known. If one only knew how to begin. Since the party she had been more eager than ever, and had planned many ways of making friends with him, but he had not been lately seen, and Joe began to think he had gone away to the station. Yes, sir. That boy is suffering for society and fun. His grandpa doesn't know what's good for him to shut him up all alone. He needs a lot of jolly boys to play with, or somebody young and lively. I have a great mind to go over and tell the old gentleman so." The idea amused Joe, who liked to do daring things and was always scandalizing Meg by her queer performances. The plan of going over to the mansion was not forgotten. And when the snowy afternoon came, Joe resolved to try what could be done. She saw Mr. Lawrence drive off and then sally out to dig her way down to the hedge, where she paused and took a survey. All quiet, curtains down at the lower windows. Servants out of sight, nothing human visible, but a curly black head. Leaning on a thin hand at the upper window, there he is. Poor boy, all alone and sick on this dismal day. It's a shame. I know I'll throw up a snowball and make him look out, and then say a kind word to him. Up went a handful of snow, and the head turned at once, showing a face which lost its listless look in a minute. As the big eyes brightened and the mouth began to smile, Joe nodded and laughed and flourished her broom. "How do you do? Are you sick?" "Better, thank you. I've had a horrid cold and been shut up all week." "I'm sorry. What do you amuse yourself with?" "Nothing. It says dull as a tomb up here." "Don't you read?" "Not much. They don't let me can." "Somebody read to you." "Grandpa does sometimes, but my books don't interest him. And I hate to ask my tutor Brooke. All the time have someone come and see you then. There isn't anyone. I'd like to see boys make such a row and my head is weak. Isn't there some nice girl who'd read and amuse you? Girls are quiet and like to play nurse." "I don't know any. You know me, so I do." "Will you come, please?" "I'm not quiet and nice, but I'll come if Mother will let me. I'll ask her now. Shut that window like a good boy and wait till I come back." With that, Joe shouldered her broom and marched back to her house, wondering what they would all say to her. Meanwhile, Laurie was in a little flutter of excitement at the idea of having company, and flew around to get ready, trying to tidy up the room, which, in spite of half a dozen servants, was anything but neat. "Mr. Laurie, please," and a surprised-looking servant came running up to announce the young lady, Miss Josephine March. "Here I am, bag and baggage. Mother sent her love, and was glad if I could do anything for you. Meg wanted me to bring some of her blancmange here. She makes it very nice. And Beth thought her cats would be comforting. I couldn't refuse. She was so anxious to do something. It so happened that Beth's funny loan was just the thing for laughing over. The kittens." Laurie forgot his bashfulness and grew sociable at once. "Tell the girl to put away the blancmange for your tea. Being soft, it will slip down without hurting your throat. What a cozy room this is. It might be if it was kept nice. But the maids are lazy, and I don't know how to make them mind. It worries me though. I'll write it up in a couple of minutes, for it only needs the hard brush. The thing's put straight on the mantelpiece. The books, bottles here." Sova turned from the light. "Pillows plumped up. Now then, you're fixed." Laurie watched her in respectful silence until she beckoned him to the sofa. "How kind you are, but please, take the big chair. And let me do something to amuse you." "No, I came to amuse you." "Shall I read aloud? I've read all my books here. If you don't mind, I'd rather talk." "Not at all. I'll talk all day if you only get me going. Beth says I never know when to stop." "Is Beth the rosy one who stays at home a good deal and sometimes goes out with a little basket?" "How did you find that out?" "What you see, I often hear you calling to one another when I'm alone up here. You always seem to be having such good times." "Beg pardon, but sometimes you forget to put the curtains down at the window where the flowers are, and when the lamps are lighted, it looks like looking at a picture to see the fire and you all around the table with your mother. Her face is right opposite, and it looks so sweet behind the flowers. I can't help watching it. I haven't got a mother, you know." The solitary, hungry look in his eyes went straight to Joe's warm heart. Laurie was sick and lonely, and feeling how rich she was in home, love, and happiness. She gladly tried to share it with him, We'll never draw the curtains anymore. And I give you leave to look as much as you like. I just wish, though, that instead of peeping you'd come over and see us. Mother is so splendid, she'd do heaps of good. And Beth would sing for you if I begged her to, and Amy would dance. And Meg and I would make you laugh over our funny stage properties, and we'd have jolly times. Wouldn't your grandfather let you? I think he would if your mother asked him. He's very kind, though. He doesn't look it, and lets me do what I like pretty much. Only he's afraid I'll be a bore to strangers. We're not strangers, we're neighbors. And you didn't think you'd be a bother. We want to know. You and I've been trying to do this ever so long. We haven't been here ever so long, but we know all our neighbors except you. You see, Grandpa lives amongst his books and doesn't much mind what happens outside. Mr. Brooke, my tutor, doesn't live here, and I have no one to go around with me. So I just stop at home and get on as well as I can. That's bad. You ought to make a dive and go everywhere you're asked. Then you'll have lots of friends and places to go. Laurie turned red, for there was so much goodwill in Joe. After a little pause, he changed the subject. Do you like your school? I don't go to school. I'm a businessman, a girl. I mean, I go to wait on my aunt, and a dear old cross soul she is too. Then they got to talking about books. And to Joe's delight, she found that Laurie loved them as well as she did. If you like them so much, come down and see ours. Grandpa is out, so you need to be afraid. I'm not afraid of anything. No, I don't believe you are. Laurie led the way from room to room, letting Joe stop to examine whatever took her fancy. And so at last they came to the library, where she clapped her hands and pranced, as she always did when she was delighted. It was lined with books. And there were pictures and statues, and distracting little cabinets, full of coins and curiosities. What riches, Theodore Lawrence! You ought to be the happiest boy in the world. A fellow can't live on books. Mercy me, it's your grandpa. Well, what if it is? You're not afraid of anything. You know, I think I am a little bit afraid of him, though I don't know why I should be. Mommy said I might come, and I don't think you're any the worse for it. I'm a good deal better for it, and ever so much obliged. I'm only very much afraid that you are very tired. Talking to me, it was so pleasant. I couldn't bear to stop the doctor to see you, sir. Would you mind if I left you for a minute? I suppose I must see him. Don't mind me, I'm as happy as a cricket here. Laurie went away, and his guest amused herself in her own way. She was standing in front of a portrait of an old gentleman. I'm sure that I shouldn't be afraid of him. He has kind eyes, and looks as though he has a tremendous will of his own poison, as handsome as my grandfather. But I like him, thank you, ma'am. Joe blushed until she couldn't blush any redder, and her heart beat uncomfortably fast as she thought what she had said, but a second look showed her that the loving eyes under the bushy gray eyebrows were kinder even than the painted ones, and there was a sly twinkle to them. So you're not afraid of me, eh? Not much, sir. And you don't consider me as handsome as your grandfather? Not quite, sir. And I've got a tremendous will, have I? Well, I only said I thought so. You like me in spite of it. Yes, I do, sir. Ha ha, you've got your grandfather's spirit. If you haven't got his face, he was a fine man, my dear, but what is better, he was a brave and honest one, and I was proud to be his friend. Thank you, sir. So what have you been doing with this boy of mine, eh? Only trying to be neighborly, sir. You think he needs cheering up a bit, do you? Yes, sir. He seems lonely, and young folks would do him good. Perhaps we are only girls, but we should be glad to help if we could, for we haven't forgotten the splendid Christmas present you sent us. That was the boy's affair. I shall come to visit you some fine day. Tell us so. There's the tea belt. We have it early on account of the boy. Come down and go on being neighborly, if you'd like to have me, sir. Shouldn't ask you if I didn't. What the chickens has got into the fellow? Oh, sorry, sir. I didn't know you'd come, that's evident enough. Come to your tea, sir. And behave like a gentleman, eh? Mr. Lawrence did not say much as he drank his 4 cups of tea, but he watched the young people, who soon shattered away like old friends. He liked Joe, and the change in his grandson hadn't escaped him. She's right, the lad is lonely, thought the old gentleman. I'll see what those little girls can do for him. After tea, Laurie took Joe to the conservatory, where he cut the finest flowers until his hands were full. Please give these to your mother and tell her I like the medicine she sent me very much. They found Mr. Lawrence standing before the fire in the great drawing room, but Joe's attention was entirely absorbed by a grand piano, which stood open. Do you play sometimes? Please do now. I want to hear it so I can tell Beth. Won't you first? I don't know how, but I love music deeply. Oh well. Joe's respect and regard for him increased very much, for he played remarkably well. Oh, bravo. That will do. Too many sugar plums are not good for him. His music isn't bad, but I hope he'll do well in more important things. Well, I'm much obliged to you, and I hope you'll come again. My respects to your mother. Good night, Dr. Joe. He shook hands kindly, but he looked as if something did not please him when they got to the hall. Joe asked Laurie if she had said something amiss. No, it was me. He doesn't like to hear me play. Why? Not, I'll tell you someday. My tutor, Mr. Brooke, will accompany you home, as I can't. No need of that, I'm not a young lady. And it's only a step. Take care of yourself, won't you? Yes, but you will come again. I hope, if you promise to come and see us after you are well. I will. Good night, Laurie. Good night, Joe. Good night. When all the afternoon's adventures had been told, the family felt inclined to go visiting in a body, for each found something attractive in the big house on the far side of the hedge. Mrs. March wanted to talk about her father with the old man, while Meg wanted to walk in the conservatory, best side for the grand piano, and Amy was eager to see the fine pictures and statues. Mother, why did Mr. Lawrence not like to have Laurie play? I'm not sure, but I think it was because his son, Laurie's father, married an Italian lady, a musician, which displeased the old man, who was very proud. The lady was good and lovely and accomplished, but he did not like her and never saw his son after he married. They both died when Laurie was a little child, and then his grandfather took him home. I fancy the boy who was born in Italy is not very strong, and the old man's afraid of losing him, which makes him so careful. Laurie comes naturally to his love of music, for he is like his mother, and I dare say that his grandfather fears he may want to be a musician too. At any rate, his skill reminds old Mr. Lawrence of the woman he did not like. How silly. Let him be a musician if he wants to, and not plague his life out, sending him to college when he hates to go. Italians are always nice, that's why he has such handsome black eyes and pretty manners. What do you know about eyes and manners? You've hardly spoken to him. I saw him at the party, and what you tell shows that he knows how to behave. That was a nice little speech about liking the medicine Mother sent him. I mean, it's the blancmange, I suppose. How stupid you are, child. He met you, of course. I never saw such a girl. You don't know a compliment when you get one. I think they are all great nonsense, and I'll thank you not to be silly and spoil my fun. Or he's a nice boy and I like him. We'll all be good to him because he hasn't got a mother. And he may come and see us. Main team army, yes. Joe, your new friend is very welcome, and I hope that Meg will remember that. Children should be children as long as they can. I don't call myself a child, and I'm not in my teens yet. What do you think, Beth? I was thinking of our Pilgrim's Progress. Maybe that house over there, full of splendid things, is going to be our palace. Beautiful. We've got to get past the lions first, though. Chapter 6. Beth finds the palace beautiful. The big house did prove a palace beautiful, though it took some time. The fact that they were poor, and the Lawrence is so rich, made them shy of accepting favors, which they could not return, and having known neither mother nor sisters, Laurie was quick to feel ashamed of the indolent life he led. He grew tired of books. And found people so interesting. Now that his tutor, Mr. Brooke, was obliged to make very unsatisfactory reports. He's always playing truant and running over next door. Never mind, let him take a holiday and make it up afterwards. The good lady next door says she is studying too hard and needs young society amusement and exercise. Young Joe feels the same, and there's something in that family that inclines me to trust them. I suspect she is right. I've been cuddling the fellow as if I've been his grandmother. Let him do what he likes so long as he's happy. And Mrs. March is doing more for him than I can. Mr. Lawrence talked with Mrs. March about Laurie's lessons and teachers, and presently, as if the idea had just occurred to him, he said to her, "The boy neglects his music now, and I'm glad, for he was getting too fond of it. But the piano suffers from lack of use. Wouldn't some young girls like to run over and practice on it now and then just to keep it in tune? Of course, if they don't care to come, never mind." When Beth heard this, the thought of practicing on that splendid instrument took her breath away. She clapped her hands in joy. "Oh, I do care very much. What dear, he looks so gruff. I'm a little frightened of him. That's just his way. Come, let's go and see him. Are you the musical girl?" "I'm Beth. I love music dearly." "How kind you are, sir." The old gentleman softly stroked her hair off her forehead, and stooping down, he kissed her. "I had a little girl once with eyes like yours. Excuse me, Mother, I'm going to make Mr. Lawrence a pair of slippers. Can I do it?" "Yes, dear. It would please him very much, and would be a good way of thanking him." After serious discussions with Meg and Joe, the pattern was chosen, the material was bought, and the slippers begun. When they were finished, Meg wrote a short, simple note, and with Laurie's help, got them smuggled onto the study table before the gentleman was up. All that day passed, and part of the next, before any acknowledgement arrived, and Beth began to fear that she had upset the old gentleman. But then on the third day, as she returned from running an errand, "Here's a letter from the old gentleman. Come quick and read it." "Oh, Beth, he sent you. Come quick. Look there, look, a piano. But look in the letter, see what he says. A piano for me, yes. All for you. Isn't it splendid of him?" We didn't read the letter. Well, not all of it. You read it. I feel so queer. Oh, it's too lovely. A piano. An upright piano of my very own. He says, "I have had many pairs of slippers in my life, but I never had any that suited me as well as yours. I like to pay my debt, so I know you will allow me to send something which once belonged to the little granddaughter I lost. With hearty thanks and best wishes." It has brackets to hold candles. It comes all complete with a rack and stool. "I remain your grateful friend and humble servant, James Lawrence." I'll tell all the girls at school. "Aren't you going to play it then?" "Yes, come on. Play us something. Do. What should I play?" "Whatever you like. Spacious firm. Laments on high with all the—" "What's the matter? Have you forgotten the tune?" "No, I forgot my manners. I must go and thank Mr. Lawrence." Beth walked deliberately down the garden, through the hedge, and in at the Lawrences' door, where she went straight to the study and knocked. "Come in," and go in she did, forgetting all the fear she had once felt about the old gentleman. She went straight up to him and held out her hand. I came to thank you for—" "Oh." But she didn't finish, for he looked so friendly, and only remembering that he had lost the little girl he loved, she threw both arms around him and kissed him. When she went home, he walked her to her own gate, shook hands cordially, and then marched back again like the handsome, soldierly old gentleman that he was. Chapter 7: Amy's Valley of Humiliation. Come on now, let's go for a splash. That boy's a perfect Cyclops, isn't he? How dare you say so when he's got both eyes? And a very handsome ones at that. I didn't see anything about his eyes. And I don't see why you should fire up when I admire his writing. Oh, you mean centaur, do I? What's the difference? No. Don't tell me it's something to do with Latin. I'm sure anyway. I just wish I had a little of the money Laurie spends on that horse. Why do you say that? Because I'm dreadfully in debt. What do you mean why? I owe at least a dozen pickled limes. And I can't pay for them till I have money. Mommy forbids me having anything charged at the shop. Our lime's the fashion now. The girls are always buying them. And unless you want to be thought mean, you must do it too. Everyone is sucking them at their desks at school. Or trading them off if one girl likes another. She gives her a lime if she's mad with her. She eats one before her face and doesn't even offer a suck. I've had ever so many but haven't returned any. And so these are deaths of honor, you know. How much will pay them off and restore your credit? Oh, 1/4 would do it. Whoa boy, whoa. Here then, but make the money last as long as you can. Oh, thank you. It must be so nice to have pocket money. How wonderful it is to take exercise again. I haven't ridden in months. Well, you look quite mythical, doesn't he, Amy? Next day the rumor went round that Amy March had 24 delicious limes, and the attentions of her friends became quite overwhelming. Katie Brown invited her to her next party on the spot. Mary Kingsley insisted on lending her watch until recess. Jenny Snow, however, a satirical young lady, offered to furnish answers to certain boring sums. But Amy had not forgotten some cutting remarks Jenny had made about Amy's lowly social status and was refused outright. A distinguished personage happened to visit the school that morning, and Amy's beautifully drawn maps were much praised, causing Miss March to assume the air of a studious young lady, which further wrinkled with Miss Snow's soul. But alas, pride goes before a fall, and no sooner had the guests paid the usual stale compliments and bowed himself out, that Jenny, under the pretense of asking an important question, informed Mr. Davies, the teacher, that Amy March had pickled limes in her desk. This much enduring man had succeeded in banishing gum after a long and stormy war, had made a bonfire of confiscated novels and newspapers, had forbidden distortions of the face, nicknames, and done all that one man could do to keep rebellious girls in order. In addition, Mr. Davies had evidently taken his coffee too strong. That morning, there was an east wind which affected his neuralgia, and his pupils had not done him the credit he felt he deserved, therefore, to use expressive, if not elegant language. He was as nervous as a witch and as cross as a bear. Young ladies, attention, if you please, at this stern order. 50 pairs of blue, black, gray, and brown eyes were obediently fixed upon his awful countenance. Miss March, come forward, and bring with you the limes you have in your desk, keeping half a dozen back. Amy laid the remaining limes down before Mr. Davies, feeling that any man possessing a human heart would relent when that delicious, perky smell met his nose. Unfortunately, Mr. Davies, particularly, detested the odor of the fashionable fruit, and disgust added to his wrath. Is that all? Not quite. Then bring the rest immediately. You're sure there are no more? I never lie. Sir, very well. Now take these disgusting things and throw them out the window. Scarlet with shame and anger, Amy went to and fro 12 mortal times, and as each doomed couple, looking oh so plump and juicy, fell from her reluctant hands, a shout from below completed the anguish of the girls, for it told them that their feast was being exalted over by the little Irish children, who were their sworn foes. Young lady, you remember what I said last week. I'm sorry this has happened, but I never allow my rules to be infringed, and I never break my word. Miss March, hold out your hand. Amy set her teeth, threw back her head defiantly, and bore without flinching several tingling blows on her little arm. There were neither many nor heavy, but that made no difference to her. For the first time in her life, she had been struck, and the disgrace in her eyes was as deep as if he had knocked her down. You will now stand on the platform until recess. It would have been bad enough to go to her seat, to see the faces of her pitying friends, or the satisfied ones of her new enemies. But to face the whole school seemed impossible, and for a second, she felt as if she could only drop down where she stood and break out crying. I shall have to tell them at home, and they will be so disappointed in me, and tell them she did when she got back, but disappointed they were not. When Amy arrived home, only Marmee was there. Mrs. March did not say much, but looked disturbed, and comforted her afflicted little daughter in her tenderest manner. Meg bathed the salted hand with glycerin and tears. Beth felt that even her beloved kittens would fail. As a balm for grief like this, and Joe wrathfully proposed that Mr. Davies be arrested without delay. For her part, Hannah pounded the potatoes for dinner, as if she had Mr. Davies under her pestle, just before school closed. Joe arrived wearing a grim expression and delivered to Mr. Davies a letter from her mother, stating that Amy would be off school for a while. She then collected Amy's property and departed, carefully scraping the mud from her boots on the doormat, as if she shook the dust of the place off her feet. That evening, Mrs. March addressed Amy. Yes, you can have a vacation, but I want you to study a little every day with Beth. I don't approve of corporal punishment, especially for girls. I dislike Mr. Davis's manner of teaching, and don't think the girls you associate with are doing you any good, so I shall ask your father's advice before I send you anywhere else. That's good. I wish all the girls would leave and spoil his old school. It's perfectly maddening to think of those lovely limes. No, I'm not sorry you lost them, for you broke the rules, and you deserve some punishment for disobedience. Do you mean you are glad I was in disgrace before the whole school? I should not have chosen that way of mending a fault, but I'm not sure that it won't do you more good than a milder method. You are getting to be altogether too conceited and important, my dear, and it's quite time you set about correcting it. During this time, Joe and Laurie had been playing chess. Then Laurie sang delightfully, being in a particularly lively humor for to the Marshs. He seldom showed the moody side of his character. After he had left, Amy said suddenly, as if busy over some new idea, "Is Laurie an accomplished boy?" "Yes, he has had an excellent education and has much talent, and will make a fine man, and he isn't conceited, is he not?" "In the least. That is why he is so charming, and we all like him so much, I see. It's nice to have accomplishments and be elegant, but not to show off or get perked up. These things are always seen and felt in a person's manner and conversation, but it's not necessary to display them, any more than it's proper to wear all your bonnets and gowns and ribbons at once, just so that folks may know you've got them." Chapter 8. Joe meets Napoleon. "Girls, where are you going?" "Never mind, little girls shouldn't ask questions." "Oh, do tell me. I should think you might let me go too. Beth is fussing with her dolls, and I haven't got anything to do and feel so lonely. We can't, dear, because you aren't invited. Now, Meg, be quiet or you'll spoil it all. You can't go, Amy, so don't be a baby and whine about it. You're going somewhere with Laurie. I know you are. You were whispering and laughing together on the sofa last night, and you stopped when I came in. Aren't you going with him?" "Yes, we are now. Do be still and stop bothering. I know. You're going to the theater to see the Seven Castles, and I shall go, for Mother said I might see it. Just listen to me a minute and be a good child. Mother doesn't wish you to go this week, because your eyes are not well enough yet to bear the lights next week. You can go with Beth and Hannah and have a nice time. I don't like that half as well as going with you and Lori. Please let me, I've been sick with this cold so long. And shut up, I'm dying for some fun. I'll be ever so good, suppose we take her. I don't believe Mother would mind if we bundle her up. Well, if she goes, I shan't, and if I don't, Lori won't like it, and it will be very rude. After he invited only us to go, and then we drag in Amy, I should think. She'd be reluctant to poke herself. Where she isn't wanted, I shall go. Meg says I may, and if I pay for myself. Lori hasn't anything to do with it. You can't sit with us. For our seats are reserved and you mustn't sit alone. So Lori will give you his place, and that will spoil our pleasure. Or he'll get another seat for you, and that's not proper when you weren't asked. Sitting on the floor with one boot on. Amy began to cry and Meg to reason with her. When Lori called from below, and the two girls hurried down, leaving their sister wailing for now, and then she forgot her grown-up ways and acted like a spoiled child, just as the party was setting out. You'll be sorry for this, Joe March. You see, if you're not fiddlesticks, they had a charming time. For the 7 Castles of Diamond Lake was brilliant and wonderful, but in spite of the comical red imps, sparkling elves, and gorgeous princes and princesses, Joe's pleasure had a drop of bitterness in it. The fairy queen's yellow curls reminded her of Amy, and between the acts she amused herself with, wondering what her sister would do to make her sorry for it. She and Amy had had many lively skirmishes, as both had quick tempers and were apt to be violent when fairly aroused. Amy teased Joe, Joe irritated Amy, and occasional explosions occurred, of which both were much ashamed after. Although the oldest Joe had the least self-control, and had hard times trying to curb the fiery spirit that was continually getting her into trouble. Her anger never lasted long, and having publicly confessed her fault, she sincerely repented and tried to do better. Her sisters used to say that they rather liked to get Joe into a fury because she was such an angel. Afterwards, poor Joe tried desperately to be good, but her bosom enemy was always ready to flame up, and it took years of patient effort to subdue it. When they got home, they found Amy reading in the parlor. She assumed an injured air as they came in, never lifted her eyes from her book or asked a single question. Perhaps curiosity might have conquered resentment, had Beth not been there to inquire and receive a glowing description of the play. I'm going up to put away her best hat. Joe's first look was towards the bureau, for after their last quarrel, Amy had soothed her feelings by turning Joe's drawer upside down on the floor. Everything was in its place, however, and after a hasty glance in various closets, bags and boxes, Joe decided that Amy had forgiven and forgotten her wrongs there. Joe was mistaken, for the next day she made a discovery which produced a tempest. Meg, Beth, and Amy were sitting together late in the afternoon when Joe burst into the room. Has anyone taken my story? No, no. Amy, you've got it. No, I haven't. You know where it is then? No, I don't. That's a fib. It isn't. I haven't got it. Don't know where it is now and don't care. You know something about it, and you'd better tell me at once, or I'll make you scold as much as you like. You'll never get your silly old story again. Why not? I burned it up. What? My little book that I was so fond of and worked over and meant to finish before Father got home. Have you really burned it? Yes, I did. I told you I'd make you pay for being so cross yesterday. You wicked, wicked girl. I can never write it again, and will never forgive you as long as I live. When Mrs. March came home, she soon brought Amy to a sense of the wrong she had done to her sister. Joe's book was the pride of her heart, and was regarded by her family as a literary sprout of great promise. It was only a half-dozen little fairy tales, but Joe had worked over them patiently, putting her whole heart into her work, hoping to make something good enough to print. She had just copied them with great care and had destroyed the old manuscript, so that Amy's bonfire had consumed the loving work of several years. Mrs. March looked grave and grieved, and Amy felt that no one would love her until she had asked pardon for the act, which she now regretted more than anyone. Joe appeared for tea, looking so grim and unapproachable that it took all Amy's courage to say, "Please forgive me, Joe. I'm very, very sorry. I shall never forgive you. It was an abominable thing to do, and you don't deserve to be forgiven ever." Amy was much offended that her overtures of peace had been repulsed and began to wish that she had not humbled herself. Joe still looked like thunder, and nothing went well that evening. The next morning Amy awoke to the clash of skates. She looked out with an impatient exclamation. Skating. Joe, it seems, had asked Laurie to go skating. In order to cheer herself up, she promised, "I should go next time, for this is the last ice we shall have, but it's no use to ask such a cross patch to take me. But make thought differently. You were very naughty, and it is hard to forgive the loss of her precious little book, but I think she might do it now. If you try her at the right minute, go after them, but don't say anything until Joe has got good-natured with Laurie. Then take a quiet minute and just kiss her, or do some kind thing, and I'm sure she'd be friends again with all her heart. I'll try it." Was not far to the river, but both Joe and Laurie were ready before Amy reached them. Joe saw her coming and turned her back. Laurie did not see her, for he was carefully skating along the shore. Sounding the ice ... for a warm spell had preceded the cold smell. "I'll go to the first band ... and see if it's all right before we begin to race." Joe heard Amy panting after her run, stamping her feet and blowing on her fingers as she tried to put her skates on, but Joe never turned and went slowly zigzagging down the river ... taking a bitter, unhappy satisfaction in her sister's troubles. "Keep near the shore, it isn't safe in the middle." Joe heard, but Amy was just struggling to her feet and did not catch a word. Joe glanced over her shoulder, and the little demon she was harboring said in her ear, no matter whether she heard or not, "Let her take care of herself." Laurie had vanished. Round the bend, Joe was just at the turn, and Amy, far behind, was striking out towards the smooth ice in the middle of the river ... For a moment, Joe stood still with a strange feeling at her heart. Then she resolved to go on, but something held and turned her around. She was just in time to see Amy throw up her hands and go down with a sudden crash of rotten ice. She tried to call Laurie, but her voice was gone. She tried to rush forward, but her feet seemed to have no strength in them. For a second she could only stand motionless, staring with a terror-stricken face at the little blue hood above the black water. "Bring a rail, quick, quick." How she did it she never knew, but for the next few minutes she worked as if possessed, blindly obeying Laurie, who was quite self-possessed and lying flat, held Amy up by his arm and hockey stick until Joe dragged a rail from the fence, and together they got the child out, more frightened than hurt, shivering, dripping, and crying. They got Amy home, and she fell asleep, rolled in a blanket before a hot fire. During the rescue, Joe had scarcely spoken when Amy was comfortably asleep, the house quiet and Mrs. March sitting by the bed. She called Joe to her and began to bind her hurt hands. "It's my terrible temper. I try to cure it. I think I have, and then it breaks out worse than ever. Oh, what shall I do? Watch and pray, dear. Never get tired of trying ... and never think it is impossible to conquer your faults. You can't understand how bad it is. It seems as if I could do anything when I'm in a passion. I get so savage I could hurt anyone and enjoy it. I'm afraid I shall do something dreadful someday and spoil my life and make everybody hate me. Oh, Mother, do help me. I will, my child, I will. Don't cry so bitterly, but remember this day, and resolve with all your soul that you will never know another like it. So, dear, we all have our temptations, some far greater than yours. and it often takes all our lives to conquer them. You think your temper is the worst in the world, but mine used to be just like it. I've been trying to cure it for 40 years, but I've only succeeded in controlling it. But you are never angry. I am angry nearly every day of my life, Joe. But I've learned not to show it. I'm not patient by nature. What helped you then? Your father, Joe. He never doubts or complains, but always hopes and works and waits so cheerfully that one is ashamed to do otherwise. He showed me that I must try to practice all the virtue I would have my little girls possess, yet you told him to go to the war and didn't cry when he went. I gave my best to the country I love and kept my tears until he was gone. We both have merely done our duty and will surely be the happier for it in the end. Amy stirred inside in her sleep, and as if eager to begin at once to mend her fault, Joe looked up with an expression on her face, which it had never worn before. I wouldn't forgive her, and if it had not been for Laurie, it might have been too late. How could I be so wicked? As if she heard. Amy opened her eyes and held out her arms, with a smile that went straight to Joe's heart. Neither said a word, but they hugged one another close, and everything was forgiven and forgotten. In one hearty kiss, Chapter 9 Meg Goes to Vanity Fair. It was the luckiest thing in the world, those king children getting measles just now. And so nice of Annie Moffat not to forget her promise. A fortnight of fun for you, and the weather is lovely. I wish I was going to have a good time and wear those nice clothes. I wish you could all go, but as you can't, I'll try and remember all my adventures and tell you them when I get back. It's the least I can do. You've been so kind and helpful. Meg stood and surveyed the go-abroady trunk, which she'd been packing with some assistance, and which was now half filled. What did Mother give you out of the treasure box? A pair of silk stockings, that carved fan, and a lovely blue sash. You could have had my coral bracelet if I hadn't smashed it. Thank you, Joe. Now let me see. There's my poplin to wear on Sunday. And at the small party looks heavy for spring. Don't it? Never mind. You've got the tarlatan for the big party. And you always look like an angel in white. It isn't low net and you don't sweep enough. But it will have to do. My bonnet don't look at all like Sally's, and I didn't like to say anything. But I was dreadfully disappointed with my umbrella. I told Mother I wanted black with a white handle, but she forgot and bought a green one with the handle that's yellowish and ugly. Annie's is silk with a gold top. I'll feel ashamed of mine. I know I will change it. No, that would be silly, nonsensical, and I'd hurt Mommy's feelings. Annie has blue and pink bows on her nightcaps, perhaps. That you could put some on mine. I don't think she should. Nice-looking caps won't match your plain gowns. In my view, poor folk shouldn't dress up. You're right, Joe, I'm sure. But if only I could have real lace on my clothes and bows on my caps, it would make me so happy. You said the other day, Meg, that going to Auntie Moffat's would make you as happy as could be. I did, and I am happy, and I won't fret. Oh, seems the more one has, the more one wants. The next day Meg departed, anticipating a fortnight of novelty and pleasure. Her mother had consented to the visit, rather reluctantly, fearing that Meg would return discontented. But Meg had pleaded hard, and Sally Gardner had promised that she'd take good care of her, and a little pleasure, it was conceded, would be delightful after a winter of hard work. And so Mrs. March had yielded, and her daughter left home, too. Take her first taste of fashionable life. Meg, how delightful. So glad you've been able to come. I'm glad to. Very kind of you to invite me. We're going to have such a good time, and everyone's looking forward to meeting you. They want to call you Daisy. Do you mind? Meg was rather daunted at first by the splendor of the Moffat home and the elegance of its occupants. They were kindly people, though not, Meg suspected, particularly cultivated or intelligent, one of Annie's older sisters. Belle was engaged to be married, a fact which Meg found extremely interesting and romantic. Mr. Moffat was a fat, jolly old gentleman, and Mrs. Moffat was a fat, jolly old lady who was much taken with Meg. In truth, so was everyone, or seemed to be. And Meg was in danger of having her head turned, but she wished she wasn't poor. When the evening for the small party came, she found that the Popland wouldn't do it. All the other girls were putting thin dresses on. So out came the tarleton, looking older, limber, and shabbier than ever next to Sally's crisp new one. She saw the girls glance at it, and then at one another, and her cheeks burned. Girls, just look at what survive. Oh my. They'll be for Belle naturally. George is always sending her flowers. These are altogether ravishing, though the letter came as, well, addressed to you, Daisy. Thank you, oh, and there's a card as well. Heavens, so sorry the flowers aren't for Belle. They're for you. Well, well. What fun, didn't know you had a lover. The flowers, Annie, are from the Lawrence boy who's next door to us. And the letter, it's from my mother. Oh yes. Meg slipped the letter into her pocket as a sort of talisman against envy, vanity, and false pride. From the box of flowers, she kept a few roses for herself and made up the rest in dainty bouquets for the other girls, offering them so prettily that Annie's elder sister, Clara, told Meg that she was the sweetest little thing she ever saw. Meg was no longer despondent. Even her dress didn't seem so very shabby now. And the evening went most pleasantly until, that is, she was seated in the conservatory, waiting for Major Lincoln, who danced with her, to bring her an ice. While she waited, she heard voices from the other side of the flowery wall. How old is the Lawrence boy? 16 or 17? It would be a grand thing for one of them, wouldn't it, Mama? Sally says that. The boys become very close to all four of the sisters, and the old man quite dotes on them. Mrs. M has laid her plans, I dare say, and she play her cards well, early though is the girl. It would seem doesn't think of it yet. I'm not too sure. She told that fib about the letter coming from her mother, as if she did know, and she blushed quite prettily when she discovered the flowers were for her. Poor thing. She'd be so nice if she were got up in some style. That dowdy tarleton seems to be all she has. I think I'll ask the Lawrence boy to come on Thursday. As a compliment to her, we'll have some fun about it afterwards. Meg was shocked, angered, and disgusted by what she heard, and though her pride helped her to disguise her feelings, she was unable to forget what she'd heard, and kept repeating it to herself until she was ready to cry and rush home to tell her troubles. A new unpleasant world had been opened to Meg, and had disturbed the peace of the old one. Her innocent friendship with Laurie was spoiled, her faith in her mother a little shaken by the worldly plan described by Mrs. Moffat, who judged others by herself, and her sensible acceptance of a simple wardrobe was weakened by Annie's assumption that a shabby dress was one of the greatest calamities on earth. Meg had a restless night and got up heavy-eyed and unhappy. Daisy dear, Annie sent an invitation to your friend, Mr. Lawrence, to come to the big party on Thursday. We'd all like to get to know him. That's very kind of you, Belle, but I'm afraid he won't come. Why not Sherry? He's too old, my child. What do you mean, how old is he? Nearly 70, I believe. You sly creature, we meant the young man. There isn't a young man, Laurie is only a little boy. He's about your age, near my sister Joe's. I'm 17 in August. It's very nice of him to send you flowers. Isn't it? He often does to all of us. My mother and the elder Mr. Lawrence are friends, you know, and the children all play together. Very nice, a pastoral state of innocence all round. What will you wear on Thursday? The old white one again? If I can mend it so it's fit to be seen. I'm afraid I tore the thing last night. Why don't you send home for another? Because Sally, I don't have another, and why should you? When the occasion so rarely demands it. Daisy, listen. I've got a sweet sky blue silk laid away somewhere, which I've outgrown, and you shall wear it to please me. That's very kind of you, Belle, but I don't mind my old dress if you don't. It does well enough for a mere child like me. Oh, but it would give me such pleasure to dress you up nicely. You'd be a little beauty with a touch here and there. I shan't let anyone see you till I've made you ready, and then we'll burst upon them, like Cinderella and her godmother at the ball. Meg couldn't refuse the offer. She thought was kindly made, and besides she wanted to see if indeed she could become a little beauty. On the Thursday evening, therefore, Belle and her maid crimped and curled Meg's hair, polished her neck and arms with some fragrant powder, put coralline salve on her lips, and laced her into a dress, which was so tight she could hardly breathe, and so low in the neck, that modest Meg blushed at herself in the mirror. Bracelets, necklace, and brooch were added, and the maid tied a pair of earrings on ... with some pink silk which didn't show. A pair of high-heeled boots were provided, and a lace handkerchief, plume fan, and a bouquet, and a silver holder completed the picture. Ravishing, ravishing. Come along and show yourself. Belle led Meg to the room, where the other young ladies were waiting. Here we are, oh my, isn't she a little beauty? A little beauty indeed, an astonishing transformation. Do you think so? Sally, I'm certain of it. You'll need to manage the skirt a little better. Daisy dear, and the French heels, we wouldn't want you to trip up. Hold still a moment and I'll deal with that. Long curl there, a perfect picture, for several minutes. Meg stood like the jacked on the fable, enjoying her borrowed plumes, while the others chattered away like magpies. Then word came that the young ladies were to go downstairs. I'm afraid to. Sally, I feel so strange and awkward and half-dressed. You're not a bit like yourself. I admit you look quite French. I just don't compare, I'm afraid. Belle has heaps of taste, the flowers. You don't need to be so careful of them. Just let them hang down, that's better. Meg safely managed the stairs, and she sailed into the drawing room, where she soon discovered that there's a charm about fine clothes which attracts a certain type of person and secures their respect. Several young ladies, who'd taken no notice of Meg before, were immediately affectionate towards her. Several young gentlemen, who had stared rather glumly at her at the previous party, now stared in admiration and asked to be introduced, and said, all men are of foolish but agreeable things to her. The older women who sat on sofas and criticized the rest of the gathering inquired who she was with an air of interest. Her name is Daisy March. Father's a colonel in the army. One of the best families, but Rivers is a fortune. You know, Meg, shocked at Mrs. Moffat's fibs, tried to look as if she hadn't heard, and went on in her new role fairly well, even though the dress kept getting under her feet and was so tight it made her sides ache, and she was in constant fear that her earrings would fly off. She waved her fan about and laughed at the gentlemen's feeble jokes, and then all of a sudden she stopped laughing. She caught sight of Laurie, and he was staring at her with undisguised surprise, and she thought disapproval too. She blushed. She wished she had her old dress on. She saw Belle nudge Annie, and the two of them glanced from her to Laurie, silly creatures with their silly talk. Determined to not let their frivolous notions affect her, Meg rustled across the room and shook hands with her friend. I'm so glad that you were able to come. Joe wanted me to, so I did. She's very keen to know how you look. And what will you tell her? I'll say that it took me a while to recognize you. You're so grown up, I'm quite afraid of you. How absurd the girls dress me up for fun. And I rather like it. Wouldn't Joe be amazed if she saw me? Yes, I think she would. Don't you like me like this? No. I don't. Why not? I'm not very keen on fuss and feathers. You know, you're quite the rudest boy I ever met. Feeling very much ruffled, Meg went and stood at a quiet window to cool her cheeks and while she was there, she overheard Major Lincoln commenting to his mother that he'd wanted to introduce Daisy March to her, but that he changed his mind. They'd made a fool of Miss March. She said turned her into a doll. Oh dear, I wish I'd been sensible and worn my own things. I wouldn't have disgusted other people, or felt so uncomfortable and ashamed of myself. She leant her forehead on the window pane and stood half hidden by the curtains. A waltz had begun, her favorite waltz. I'm sorry I was rude, please forgive me. Come and dance, I'm afraid you'd find it disagreeable. Not at all, can't wait. I'll be good, I don't like your gown, but I do think you're just splendid. Thank you, Laurie. Take care of that. The gown you don't like doesn't trip you up. It's the plague of my life. I was a goose to wear it. Away they went, fleet and graceful, as they twirled merrily round and round, a blithe young couple, who felt more friendly to each other than ever, having survived their small tiff. Laurie, yes, Meg, I want you to do me a favor. Certainly don't tell them at home about my dress. They won't understand the joke. And Mother will be worried. I'll tell them myself and fester. Mother, how silly I've been. So you won't tell, will you? No, Meg, I give you my word. But what shall I say when they ask me? Just say that I looked nice and was having a good time. I'll say the first, but how about the other? You didn't look as if you were having a good time. True. Laurie, don't think I'm horrid. I only wanted a little fun. When the waltz was finished and Laurie stood fanning, Meg had become quite of breath. Ned Moffat approached. What does he want? He put his name down for 3 dances. And now he's coming for them. What a bore. Laurie didn't speak to Meg again till supper time, when he saw Meg drinking champagne with Ned, while Ned went off to refill Meg's glass. Laurie came and offered her a brotherly word. You'll have a splitting headache tomorrow if you drink a lot of that. Your mother wouldn't approve. I'd keep off it, Meg. If I were you, I'm not Meg tonight. I'm a doll that does all sorts of crazy things. Tomorrow I'll put away my fuss and feathers, and I'll be desperately good again. If that's the case, then I wish tomorrow were here. Meg danced and flirted, chatted and giggled just as the other girls did. She blundered through the cotillion, nearly upsetting her partner with her long skirt, and romping in a way that scandalized Laurie, who prepared a lecture, but had no chance of delivering it, because Meg kept away from him. When Laurie came to say good night, she attempted a smile. The splitting headache had already begun. Remember what I asked you. Meg was ill throughout the following day, and on Saturday she returned home, exhausted after her fortnight of fun, and feeling that she'd sat in the lap of luxury. Long enough. It's so very pleasant to be quiet again, and not to be thinking of one's manners all the time. Home isn't splendid, but it's a nice place. I'm glad to hear you say so, my dear. I was afraid it would seem dull and impoverished after your fine accommodation. You did enjoy yourself, though. Oh yes, Joe. Most definitely. I told you I had a charming time. Although, yes, my dear Marmee, I want to fuss well. I thought so. What is it, dear? Shall I go off to bed? Of course not. Don't I always tell you everything? Well, the fact is, I was ashamed to speak of it when the children were here, but I want you to know about all the dreadful things I did. At the mall Fitz, we are prepared on Thursday for the big party. They dressed me up, made me look like a fashion plate. I knew it was silly, but they flattered me and spoke quantities of nonsense at me. Laurie thought I wasn't proper, though he didn't say so. Was that all? No, it isn't all. I drank champagne and I tried to flirt, and altogether I was abominable. There's something more, I think. Yes, about Laurie and us. Laurie and me, they were saying these unpleasant things. Who were Mrs. Moffat and Annie? About what they supposed we thought. Hope we're planning marriage. Do you mean yes? All because Laurie's grandfather has money. It was horrid. There was a brief silence. Joe saw her mother fold her lips tightly together, as if ill-pleased that such notions had been put into Meg's innocent head. Well, if that isn't the greatest rubbish I ever heard. Why didn't you tell them so on the spot? I couldn't, it was so embarrassing for me. And then I was angry and ashamed. Just wait till I see Annie Moffat. I'll show you how to settle such ridiculous stuff. The idea of us having plans because Laurie's rich, the idea of him marrying you or any one of us. Oh, won't he shout when I tell him no? You mustn't tell him, Joe. I'll never forgive you, she mustn't. Must she, mother? No. Never repeat that foolish gossip, Joe. Forget it as soon as you can. Meg, I was very unwise to let you stay with people of whom I know so little. They may be generous and kind, but they are worldly too. It would seem, and ill-bred and full of vulgarity. I'm sorry that you spent time with them, more sorry than I can express. It's all right, mother. I won't let the experience hurt me. I'll forget all the bad and whatever was good. I'll remember I'm a silly little girl, I know, and I'll stay with you till I'm fit to take care of myself. But it is nice to be praised and admired. I can't help saying I like it. Of course not, my dear. There's nothing more natural, but one needs to learn how to recognize the praise that's worth having, to excite the admiration of excellent people, by being modest as well as pretty. While Meg pondered these words in silence, Jo stood with her hands behind her, looking both interested and perplexed. It was a new thing to hear Meg talking about admiration, lovers and things of that sort, and Jo felt as if her sister had grown up amazingly in the 2 weeks she'd been with the Moffats, and that she was drifting away from her into a world that she couldn't follow. Mother, was there some truth in what Mrs. Moffat said? Do you have plans? My dear, I have a great many plans. All mothers do, but mine are rather different from Mrs. Moffat's. And perhaps this is just the time to tell you some of them. Set that romantic little heart of yours right, and your head. You're young, but not too young to understand me, nor Jo are you. So listen to my plans, and if you think they're good, help me to carry them out. Looking as if she was about to take part in some very solemn affair, Jo stood close to her mother, and Mrs. March held the hand of each of the daughters and watched the two young faces wistfully. I want my daughters to be beautiful and accomplished, to be admired, loved, and respected, to be happy, to be well and wisely married, and to lead useful, pleasant lives with as little care and sorrow as God sees fit. To send them, being loved by a good man, being chosen by him, it's the best, the sweetest thing that can happen to a woman, a wonderful experience, which I sincerely hope that my daughters will know. It's natural, Meg, that you should think about it. It's right to hope for it and wise to prepare for it, so that when the happy time comes, you'll feel ready for the duties and worthy of the joy. My dear girls, I am ambitious for you, but I've no wish that each of you should make a dash in the world. Marry a man because he's rich and has a splendid house. If there's no love in that house, the house can't be a home. Money is necessary, money is precious. If well used, it's a noble thing. But I never want you to think that it's the first or the only prize to strive for. I'd rather you were poor men's wives and happy and loved than queens on thrones and lacking self-respect and peace of mind. Belle Moffat says that poor girls don't stand a chance unless they put themselves forward very well. Then we'll be old maids. That's right, Jo. Better to be happy old maids than unhappy wives or unprincipled girls running around in search of husbands. Don't be troubled, Meg. Poverty seldom dawns a sincere lover. Some of the best, the most honored women I know were poor girls, but they were worthy of love. They weren't allowed to be old maids. Leave these things to time. Help to make this home a happy one, and in doing so, you'll be fit to live in homes of your own, if they're offered to you, and content to live here if they're not. And remember, I'm always ready to be your confidant. One who hopes and trusts that, whether they're married or single, my daughters will be the pride and comfort of my life. We will be Marmy, we will. Chapter 10, the PC and the Poe. Spring arrived, the garden had to be put in order, and each sister was given a share of the little plot to do what she liked with. The girls' tastes and horticulture differed. As much as their characters, Meg's quarter had roses, heliotrope, myrtle, and a little orange tree. Jo's was never like from one season to another. She was always trying experiments. Beth nurtured old, fashioned fragrant flowers, while Amy created a bower. A rather small and earwiggy sort of bower, but very pretty to look at. There were indoor diversions too. All the girls admire the works of Dickens, so they formed the PC, that is the Pickwick Club, which met every Saturday evening in the garret and produced a weekly newspaper, the Pickwick Portfolio. This was edited by Jo, who, being of a literary turn, took on the guise of Augustus Snodgrass, and it contained original Taylor's poetry, local news, funny advertisements, and hints and comments in which the contributors, good-naturedly, reminded each other of their faults and shortcomings. One Saturday evening, after Mr. Pickwick had read aloud the portfolio, Meg, the eldest, was given the Pickwick role. Mr. Snodgrass rose to make a proposition. "Mr. President, fellow Pickwickians, I wish to propose the admission of a new member, one who highly deserves the honor, would be deeply grateful for it, and would add immensely to the spirit of the club and the literary value of our paper. I propose Mr. Theodore Teddy Lawrence. Come on, do have him. We'll put it to the vote. All in favor of the motion, please indicate as much by saying aye, aye. Beth, I mean, Mr. Topman, won't you say aye? Aye. Those who are contrary-minded say no." Mr. Pickwick and Mr. Winkle, Amy, were both contrary-minded. "We don't want any boys, they only bounce about. We wish to be private and proper. My worry is that he'll laugh at our paper and make fun of us. Mr. President, I give you my word as a gentleman, Laurie won't do anything of the sort. He likes to ride, and he'll give a fresh tone to our contributions and keep us from being sentimental also. We do so little for him, and he does so much for us. I think that at the very least, we should offer him a place here in return, and make him welcome if that is he comes. I agree, even if we're a bit afraid of what might happen. I say that we ought to let him in. His grandpa too, if he likes. Bravo, Topman, bravo. So let's vote again. All those in favor say aye. Aye, unanimous. Good blessings on you. And now, as there's nothing like taking time by the fat lock, to borrow a characteristic phrase from Mr. Winkle, I shall present the new member in person, to the dismay of the rest of the club. Jo went to the cupboard, opened its door, and revealed Laurie sitting on a rag bag. He'd been concealed there for the entire meeting. "Good evening to you all, Jo. You rogue, you traitor, Jo. How could you, Mr. President? You two have got a lot of nerve. Mr. President, ladies, I beg pardon, gentlemen. Allow me to introduce myself. My name is Sam Weller, and I am the very humble servant of this club. Excellent, excellent. My faithful friend and noble patron here, who has so flatteringly presented me, is not to be blamed for tonight's base strategy. I planned it, and he only gave in after a lot of coercion. Come now, Sam, don't lay it all on yourself. I suggested the cupboard, and never mind what he says. Mr. President, I'm the wretch that did it, sir. But on my honor, I will never devise such a base strategy again, and I henceforth devote myself to the interests of this immortal club. Here has a slight token up my gratitude and my way of promoting friendship between adjoining nations. I have set up a post office in the lower corner of the garden, in the old birdhouse. In fact, a fine spacious building with padlocks on the doors. It will hold all sorts of things, and will be a great time saver. Letters, manuscripts, books, and packages can be placed there for collection. I have a key, and the Pickwick Club will have a key. Here is the key indeed. I place it upon the table, And thank you for your kindness. Bravo, yes, bravo, bravo. The admittance of Sam Weller was not regretted. A more devoted and jovial member no club could ever have. As anticipated, he added spirit to the meetings and toned the Pickwick portfolio. In fact, Joe regarded his writings as worthy of Bacon, Milton, or Shakespeare, and under his influence, remodeled her own works with good effect. She thought the post office was a capital institution and flourished wonderfully, as in any P.O. A startling variety of items passed through it. Tragedies and scarves, poetry and pickles, music and gingerbread, invitations and scoldings. Laurie's grandfather joined in the enterprise, and the old man's gardener Hayes, who was smitten with Hannah's charms, sent her a love letter. How the girls laughed when they discovered it, never dreaming that the former birdhouse would witness a great many letters of that sort. In the years to come, Chapter 11 experiments. The Kings are off to the seashore tomorrow, and I'm free 3 months vacation. I'm going to enjoy it so much. I very much hope you will, dear. June 1st, a warm day. Meg, free of governess duties for a good long while, had returned home in excellent spirits, and she found Mrs. March sewing in what the girls called Marmy's corner, Joe lying on the sofa in an unusual state of exhaustion, Beth taking off her dusty boots, and Amy making lemonade for the refreshment of the whole party. At March went away today, for which be joyful. I was mortally afraid that she'd ask me to go with her. Plumfield is about as festive as a churchyard. I was in such a hurry to be through that I was uncommonly helpful and sweet with the old lady, and feared that she'd find it impossible to part from me. I had a final fright when she was in the carriage and popped her head out and called out, "Josephine, won't you?" But I didn't hear any more. I turned and fled, dishonorable of me, I know, and whisked around the corner for safety. Poor Joe, you came in looking as if bears were after you, Aunt. March is a regular sapphire, isn't she? She means vampire. Not seaweed, but it don't matter. Too warm to be particular about vocabulary. What will you do on your vacation? I shall lie abed late and do nothing. I've had to get up early all winter and spend my days working for other people. So now I'm going to rest to my heart's content. That's to dozy away. Won't suit me. I've brought in heaps of books. And I intend to sit and read on my perch in the old apple tree and improve the shining hours, except, of course, when I'm with Laurie and having a lot. No, if I'm not allowed to say samphire. You can't say larks, nightingales then, which is proper and appropriate, since he's something of a warbler. Let's not do lessons for a while, Beth. Let's play all the time and rest. Well, I will if Mother don't mind. May we, Mother? May we do what we like? You can try your experiment for a week. I rather think that by Saturday night, you'll find that all play and no work is as bad as all work and no play. Oh dear, no. It will be marvelous, I'm sure. Your lemonade, thank you. And now I propose a toast. Fun forever. They began the experiment by lounging for the rest of the day. The next morning, Meg failed to appear until 10 o'clock. Her solitary breakfast didn't taste very good, and the parlor seemed lonely and untidy. Joe hadn't filled the vases, Beth hadn't dusted, and Amy's books lay scattered about. Nothing was neat and pleasant except for Marmy's corner, and there Meg sat to rest and read, which meant to yawn and imagine what pretty summer dresses she'd buy. With her salary, Joe went boating with Laurie and burnt the skin off her nose and got a raging headache by reading for too long. In the afternoon, Beth rummaged everything out of the big closet and worried herself the resulting confusion, and with attempting to learn 3 or 4 songs at once, and Amy put on her best white frock and sat down in her bower to draw, hoping that somebody would see her and inquire who the talented young lady was. But no one appeared except for an inquisitive daddy, Longlegs, who examined her work with interest. And then the rain came and Amy's frock was damaged at tea time. The girls compared notes. A delightful day, delightful. Though it did seem unusually long. Didn't it? Very much so. The experiment, you think, is working well? Oh yes, certainly, Marmee. Yes, my dear. Have you something for my nose? With Hannah's help, Mrs. March did the neglected duties, keeping the home pleasant and the domestic machinery running smoothly. For the girls, the days kept getting longer and longer, and tempers shorter and shorter. Things were uncomfortable and unsettling. Things were fidgety. Things went wrong. Meg spoiled some clothes in an attempt to refurbish them. Jo quarreled with Laurie and began to wish that she'd gone away with Aunt March. Beth's tranquility was so disturbed that on one occasion, she actually shook poor dear Joanna, her invalid doll, while Amy, left to amuse and care for herself, found that this accomplished and important self of hers was a great burden. By Friday night, well, sisters, the rest of the week is almost over. Yes, it's been very different, yes. It has. When the girls got up on Saturday morning, they found that there was no fire in the kitchen, no breakfast in the dining room, and no Mother Mercy on us. What's happened? Is Mother ill? No, she's very tired, she says. And she's going to stay quietly in her room all day, and let us do the best we can. What about Hannah? Mother says she's having a holiday. Well, that's unfortunate. We'll manage. I'm sure I'll make breakfast. She did so. She felt quite matronly. Behind the teapot, Jo carried a tray up to her mother. With the cook's compliments, the tea was bitter and the omelet scorched. But Mrs. March received the repast with thanks, laughed heartily over it when Jo had gone, and attended to the more palatable provisions, which she'd taken the precaution of securing in advance. Down below, meanwhile, many were the complaints, and great the disappointment of the head cook. Listen, Meg, you can be the missus, receive company, and give orders and so on. I'll prepare the dinner, thank you. Jo knew even less than her sister about culinary affairs, but had perfect faith in her own powers. Laurie can be invited. I'll put a note in the post office. You better see what there is before you start offering hospitality. There's corned beef and plenty of potatoes. And I'll get some asparagus and a lobster, some lettuce. I'll make a salad. Do you know how? Not yet, but the book will tell me. For dessert, lemons and strawberries followed by coffee. If you want to be elegant, you'll help if I get stuck. Won't you? Yes, but I don't know much. You better ask Mother's permission before you order anything. Of course I shall. I ain't a fool. When Jo went up to see her mother, she was told that she should get what she liked. Mrs. March declared that she was taking a vacation today and amusing herself, and she'd be going out to dinner. She didn't want to be bothered about domestic matters, and she'd never enjoyed housekeeping anyway. The unusual spectacle of her customarily busy mother, seated comfortably in the rocking chair and reading, made Jo feel as if something akin to an eclipse, an earthquake, or a volcanic eruption had occurred, and that everything somehow was out of sorts. She felt out of sorts herself. She returned to the parlor to find Beth in tears. Beth, what's wrong? What happened? Look. Pip the canary lay dead in his cage. His claws were pathetically extended, as if begging for food. I forgot about him. Didn't feed him. Oh, Pip. Pip, how can I be so cruel to you? Jo took the poor thing, looked into his half-open eye, and felt his little heart. She shook her head. I'm sorry, Beth. Put him in the oven. Maybe he'll get warm and revive. He's been starved, and I won't have him baked as well. If you like, you can have my domino box for a coffin. Thank you, and I'll make him a shroud. And he shall be buried in a grave, and I'll never have another bird, never. I'm not good enough to own one. Don't cry anymore, Beth. It's a great pity, I admit. Nothing's gone right this past week, and poor Pip's had the worst of the experiment. Make the shroud and lay them in my box, and after the dinner party, there'll be a nice little funeral and we'll all go to it. Beginning to feel as if she'd undertaken a great deal. But with both the cooking with funeral arrangements, Jo went into the kitchen, which she found in a discouraging state of confusion, got the dishes piled up, ready for washing, and rekindled the stove. She then walked to the market and bought a very young lobster, some very old asparagus, and 2 boxes of acidic strawberries, flattering herself that she'd made good bargains. She trudged home and discovered that the bread, which Hannah had left to rise, had risen up from its pan and risen over in the parlor. Meanwhile, the dear departed lay in the domino box, and Beth sat nearby and put the finishing touches to the shroud. "Beth, oh, Mother, Amy told me what happened. I'm very sorry." After giving comfort to Beth, and after peeping here and there to see how matters went, Mrs. March went out. A sense of helplessness fell upon the girls, and they were seized by despair when, a few minutes later, Miss Crocker appeared. She was a thin, yellow spinster with a sharp nose and inquisitive eyes, a woman who saw everything and gossiped about it. The girls disliked her, but they've been taught to be kind to her because she was old and poor. "I've come to dinner, Mother, is indeed. I'm afraid, but you're having dinner nonetheless." "Yes, I believe so." Jo. Now, Amy, Miss Crocker would like to know how much longer Miss Crocker will have to wait. The asparagus was boiled hard. The potatoes were hard because they had to be hurried in order to not keep the asparagus waiting, and the lobster was a scarlet mystery, which was hammered and poked until its meager proportions were revealed and required concealment in a grove of lettuce leaves. Well, if they can't eat any of it, they can have bread and butter. The guests were encouraged to the table. Laurie, who was accustomed to all sorts of elegance, Miss Crocker, whose sharp eyes were certain to notice all the failures and whose tattling tongue would report them far and wide. The meal commenced well. Jo. This is a dish like no other. Teddy, please advise me if you ever do the cooking again." "Miss Crocker, how are you finding it? I won't eat anymore." "Well, you're not saving yourself, are you, for the dessert?" One item after another had been tasted by the diners and had been left, but the dessert, Jo thought, was her strong point. She'd sugared the fruit well and had provided a pitcher of cream. Her hot cheeks cooled a little, and she drew a long breath as the pretty glass plates went round and gracious looks were bestowed upon the little rosy islands which floated in their creamy sea. Miss Crocker was the first to attempt a strawberry. She made a wry face and demanded more water. Jo had left herself out of dessert, since the strawberries had dwindled sadly when they were picked over. She glanced at Laurie, yes, who munched away manfully, though there was a slight pucker around his mouth, and he kept his eyes fixed on his plate. Amy, unsuspecting, took a heaped spoonful. "What's the matter? Salt instead of sugar? And the cream sour? No." "Oh well, I'm enjoying mine." Jo looked at Laurie, and the comical side of the affair suddenly struck her. "Oh, Jo," and everyone else was smitten with laughter too. Even at last Miss Crocker. Bread and butter. Anyone after the bread and butter had been consumed. Jo declared that she lacked the strength of mind clear up, and that the diners should sober themselves with a funeral. Miss Crocker decided that this was the moment to leave. Laurie dug a grave under the ferns in the grove, and little Pip was laid in it, with much lamentation by his tender-hearted mistress, and the grave was covered with moss. And at the head of the grave, a stone was placed upon which Aretha, violets, and chickweed was hung. "Beth, yes. I've written an epitaph. Shall I read it to you, please? Here lies Pip March, who died June 7th, loved and lamented sore, and not forgotten soon." After the ceremony, Beth was overcome with emotion and the effects of Jo's meal, and on retiring to bed, found that the bed she'd retired to was not yet made, and she assuaged her grief by putting things in order. Meg helped Jo clear away the remains of the feast, a task which occupied them for half the afternoon. And since the strawberries and cream had produced a bad effect on her temper, Laurie took Amy for a drive, and still, there was tea to be got ready and errands to be done, and 1 or 2 bits of sewing. What a dreadful day this has been. It seems shorter than previous days, but oh so uncomfortable. Not a bit like home, it can't be. Like home, can it not without Marmee and Pip? They sat on the porch. The June roses were budding beautifully in. The twilight fell, and Mrs. March returned from wherever she'd been, and took her place among the girls, looking as if her holiday had failed to be much pleasanter than theirs. I wonder, are you satisfied with your experimental? Do you want another week of it? I don't, nor do I. I don't. Do you think that it might be better if one doesn't always think of oneself? That it might be better and pleasanter to live for others a little and have a few daily duties which make leisure all the sweeter when it comes. We do, mother. Lounging and larking don't pay. I agree, and as Miss Crocker reminded me, I met her on the way over. It's good to learn important skills, such as plain cooking. No woman should be without such an accomplishment. Mother, I've been wondering all day, did you go away and leave us? Just to see how we'd get on, and teach us a lesson. I did. I wanted you to realize how the comfort of us all depends on each of us contributing our sin. While Hannah and I did your work, you got on pretty well, though I don't think you were very happy or amiable. So I thought, as a little lesson, that I'd show you what happens when everyone thinks only of themselves, my dears. Work is wholesome. It keeps us from boredom and mischief. It's good for our health and our spirits. Gives us a sense of power and independence, and there's plenty of it to go around. So take up your burdens again. They may seem heavy, but they'll grow lighter as you learn to carry them. We'll work like these, and we'll love it too, you see, if we don't. And the next dinner party I have will be a success. Marm and I'll make that set of shirts for father. Instead of letting you, I'm not fond of sewing, but I'll do it better than fussing over my own things, which are plenty nice enough as they are. I'll study every day, and I won't spend so much time playing with my dolls. And I'll learn how to make buttonholes, and I'll improve my vocabulary. Very good, I'm satisfied with the experiment, and I fancy that we should have to repeat it, but don't go to the other extreme. Though, have regular hours for work and play. Make each day both useful and pleasant, and show that you value time by using it well. As a result, your lives while you're young will be delightful. Old age will bring few regrets, and you'll find that you've achieved a beautiful success. In spite of poverty, will remember mother. Chapter 12, Camp Lawrence. Beth was postmistress. She was at home the most, and could attend the post regularly, and she dearly liked the daily task of unlocking the little door of the post office and distributing the mail. One day in July she came in with her hands full, and went about the house leaving letters and parcels. Here's your posy, mother. Laurie never forgets that. Number Beth, he never does. Thank you. Beth put the fresh nose gay into the vase that stood in Marmee's corner, and it was kept well supplied by the affectionate boy. Miss Meg March, 1 letter and 1 glove, only 1. I left a pair over there. Didn't you drop the other in the garden? No, I'm sure I didn't. Oh, I hate to have our gloves. Never mind though. The other may be found, and the latter, just a translation. I wanted of a German song done by Mr. Brooke. I guess this isn't Laurie's writing. Mrs. March glanced at Meg, who was looking very pretty in her gingham morning gown, and with the little curls blowing about her forehead, and looking very womanly too, as she sat at her work table and resumed her sewing. And as she sewed, her mind was busy with innocent, girlish fancies, and was quite unaware of the thought that was in her mother's mind regarding Mr. Brooke, and the feeling he might have for Meg. She was so unaware indeed that her mother smiled. Next Beth went to the study. 2 letters for Dr. Joe. Thank you a book, thank you in a funny old hat, mercy me Laurie, such a sly fellow. I told him that I wished bigger hats for the fashion, because if it's a hot day, I always burn my face, and he said, why mind fashion, wear a big hat and be comfortable, and I said that I would if I had one. So he sent you this, yes, to tease me, will you wear it? Yes, for fun and to show him that I don't care for fashion. She hung the anti-cat on a bust of Play-Doh, and then, after Beth had left the room, she read her letters. The first was from her mother. My dear, I write a little word to tell you. With how much satisfaction I watch your efforts to control your temper. You say nothing about your trials, failures, or successes, and you think, perhaps that no one sees them but the good Lord, whose help you ask each day. I see them, and I hardly believe in the sincerity of your resolution, for it begins to bear fruit. Go on, my dear, patiently and bravely, and always believe that no one sympathizes more tenderly with you than your loving mother. Oh, that does me good. That's worth millions of money and pounds and ounces of praise. I do try more, me, and I'll keep on trying, and I won't get tired because I have you to help me. I've tried to be good, and I admit I didn't think that anyone noticed, but you did, of course, and approval from you is approval I value the most, feeling stronger than ever to confront and subdue her. Napoleon Joe picked up the letter, which was blotted with a few happy tears, and pinned it inside her frock as a shield, and a reminder in case she was met by a Polly unawares. Then, quite ready for the contents of the second letter, whether they be good or bad, she opened it and read it. And very soon she came flying in to tell Meg the news. Meg. Yes, Laurie's written what he says. Some English girls and boys, the Vaughn family, are coming to see me tomorrow, and he says that he wants to have a jolly time and roll the Vaughns up the river for lunch and croquet. They have a tent pitched in Long Meadow. He wants the four of us to join them. Oh, it'll be all right, Beth. Nobody shall worry you, Laurie promises. And Mr. Brooke will be coming. He says to keep the boys steady, and Kate Vaughn will play propriety for the girls. I'll say yes, of course. Well, it'll be such a help to Laurie because I can row, and Meg will see to the lunch. And Beth, you and Amy will be useful too, in some way or other. I hope these Vaughns aren't fine grown-up people. Do you know anything about them, Joe? Only that there are 4 of them. Kate's older than you. I don't think Laurie admires her very much. Primmed up his mouth. I remember when he mentioned her name. My French print is clean, fortunately. It's just the thing so becoming. What will you wear, Joe? The scarlet and gray boating suit. That'll be good enough for me. I'll be rowing and tramping about. Don't want any starch to think of, Beth. You'll come, won't you? Yes, as long as you don't let any of the boys talk to me. I won't, not a single one. I like to please Laurie, and I'm not afraid of Mr. Brooke. He's so kind. He asked me to go over and play to him tonight. And I'll go, but I don't want to play tomorrow, or sing or say anything. I'll work hard and I won't trouble anyone. And you'll take care of me, Joe. I will. Then I'll go. That's my good girl. You try to fight off your shyness, and I love you for it. Fighting faults isn't easy, as I know, and a cheery word, as mothers aware, kind of gives one a lift. Well, my dear, I like to think it does. And Joe gave the thin cheek a grateful kiss, which was more precious to Mrs. March than if she'd been given back the rosy roundness of her youth. Now then, let's go around the house and do double duties today, so that we can have easy minds tomorrow. I abandon the pen and take up the broom. When the sun peeped into the girls' room next morning, in order to promise them a fine day, he saw a comical sight. Each had made such preparations as seemed appropriate. Meg had an extra row of little curl papers across her forehead. Joe had anointed her afflicted face with copious amounts of cold cream. Beth had taken Joanna to bed with her to atone for the approaching separation. and Amy had put a clothes peg on her nose. In order to uplift this offending feature, it was one of the sort that artists used to hold the paper in their drawing boards, so it was perfectly appropriate. The sun was much amused by the scene, and burst out with such radiance that Jo woke up and roused all her sisters with a hearty laughed at Amy's ornament. Amy, oh Amy, sunshine and laughter were good omens for a pleasure party, and soon a lively bustle began. Beth, who was the first to be dressed and ready, stood at the window and gave frequent reports to her sisters regarding activities next door. There goes the man with the tent, Mrs. Barker's doing up the lunch in a hamper and a great basket, and Mr. Lawrence. What up, Mr. Lawrence? He's looking up at the sky, and now he's looking at the weather vane. I wish he could come too. And there's Laurie. What's Laurie doing? He's dressed like a sailor. Nice boy. Mercy me, a carriage has arrived and it's full of people. Which people? A tall lady, that will be Kate. A little girl, that will be Grace. 2 dreadful boys. Oh, one of them is lame, poor thing. He's got a crutch. Laurie didn't tell us that. Be quick, girls, it's getting late. I'm ready. Bye, there's Ned Moffat. I do declare, look, Meg. Yes, so it is. How strange that he should come. I thought he was at the mountains. Ah, there's Sally. I'm glad she got back in time. Am I all right? Show a regular daisy. Put your hat straight though. It looks sentimental when it's tipped that way, and it'll fly off at the first puff. Better. Shall we go, Jo? Yes, Meg, your hat, well, you ain't intending to wear it. Oh, but I am, Jo. It's too absurd. I think it's capital. It's shady, it's light, and it's big, and it's fun. Come on. As the sisters left the house, Laurie ran to meet them and in the most cordial fashion presented them to his friends, with the lawn as the reception room. Meg was much flattered by Mr. Ned's assurances that he came especially to see her. Jo understood why Laurie primed up his mouth when speaking of Kate, for the young lady had a standoff. Don't touch me air. Beth decided that Frank, the lame boy, was not at all dreadful, but gentle and feeble, and for that reason she would be kind to him. And Amy and the little girl Grace stared dumbly at one another for a few minutes, and then suddenly became very good friends, tense. Lunch and croquet equipment had been sent on ahead, so the party was soon embarked, and the 2 boats pushed off together, leaving Mr. Lawrence on the shore waving his hat. Goodbye. Enjoy yourselves. We shall. Jo, let me grab an oar. My dear fellow, did I hurt you? Not a bit. Laurie and Jo rowed one boat, and Mr. Brooke and Ned the other. Jo said, I do admire it. Thank you. Sally deserved a vote of thanks, for it was a general utility. It provoked amusement and broke the ice. It created a refreshing breeze as it flapped to and fro. And if it rains, but it won't, if it does, it'll make an excellent umbrella for the whole party. Kate Von, seated at the stern of Jo's boat, was rather amazed at the strained girl's proceedings, especially when Jo lost her oar and shouted, "Oh, Christopher Columbus!" But after examining her several times through her lawn, yet, Miss Kate decided that Jo was odd but rather clever, and smiled upon her from a distance. Meg, in the other boat, was delightfully situated face to face, as she was with the 2 rowers, who gazed at her with admiration and feathered their oars with what they convinced themselves was uncommon skill and dexterity. Mr. Brooke was a serious young man, and Meg liked his quiet manners, and considered him to be an encyclopedia of useful knowledge. In fact, he never talked to her very much, but he looked at her a great deal, and she felt sure that he didn't regard her with aversion. As for Ned, he was a college student, and so he put on all the airs which freshmen consider it their duty to assume. He was not very wise, but he was good-natured, and altogether an excellent person to take on a picnic. It was not far a long meadow, but the tent had already been pitched. By the time that the boats arrived, it stood in a pleasant green field, which had 3 wide spreading oaks in the middle, and a smooth strip of turf for croquet. This way, everyone. This is please turning into quite a little. Welcome to Camp Lawrence. Brooke is Commander-in-Chief, and I'm Commissary General. All other fellows are staff officers. And you ladies are company. Thank you. The tent, ladies, is for your especial benefit. This oak tree is the mess room. That one there is the camp kitchen. And the third tree, ladies, is your drawing room. Now let's play a game of croquet before it gets hot. Good stroke, Joe. Well done, though the Englishers played well. The Americans under Laurie's captaincy played better and contested every inch of ground, as if the spirit of the revolution inspired them. Joe and Fred Vaughn had several skirmishes, and Joe got through the final wicket. Then Joe struck the ball badly and it rolled a long way short of the stake, which failure ruffled her a great deal. Well, that's hard luck, Miss Joe. My turn. Oh, what a stroke. The ball stopped an inch on the wrong side of the wicket. What a stroke. Running up to examine the result of his effort, and observing that no one was very near, he gave the ball a sly nudge with his toe. I'm through the wicket. Yes, but he moved the ball. I did not. It rolled a bit. Perhaps rolled. That's right. Stand off, please. Give me room. We don't cheat in America. But you can if you choose. Ho ho, Yankees are the trickiest by far. Everybody knows that. Room, please. And Fred having hit Joe's ball, croquet it far away into the bush. Joe opened her lips in order to say something rude, but checked herself, went red right up to her forehead, and stood and hammered a wicket down with her mallet, while Fred took aim, here we go, and sent his ball against the stake. I'm out. Joe went off to retrieve her ball, and was a long time finding it, but came back looking calm and quiet. By the time she had regained the place she had lost, the other side was close to victory, for Kate's ball lay near the stake and would decide the match. Contest over by George. Kate won't miss, but Kate might not be given a chance. It was Joe's turn first. She turned to Fred. You're right, of course. We Yankees are tricky. We have a trick of being generous to our enemies. She struck her ball, especially when we beat them. She struck it well. Looks good, Joe. Looks good, and it hit the stake. Oh, what a stroke. Laurie threw his hat up in the air, and then remembered that it wouldn't do to exult over the defeat of his guests, and he calmed himself. He went up to Joe. Well done, well done. He did cheat, I saw him, but he won't cheat again, take my word for it. And then Meg drew Joe aside, under the pretense of pinning up a loose braid. You were provoked most dreadfully, but you kept your temper. I'm so glad. Don't praise me, Meg. I could box the boy's ears this very minute, and I would have boiled over, I assure you, if I hadn't stayed a while among the nettles and was able to hold my tongue. I'm simmering now, so I hope I'll keep out of my way. Then Mr. Brooke, Commander-in-Chief, looked at his watch, announced that it was time for lunch, and asked Laurie, his Commissary General, to light the fire and get water. Meg recommended Joe for the task of making coffee, so Joe went to preside over the coffee pot, feeling that her recent lessons in cookery were to do her honor. Very soon, the tablecloth was spread with an inviting array of eatables and drinkables, prettily decorated with green leaves. This is wonderful. You simply have to try. And everyone settled themselves to a hearty meal, for youth is seldom dyspeptic, and exercise develops wholesome appetites. A very merry lunch it was. Everything seemed new and funny, and there were inevitable mishaps. Cups and plates, acorns dropped into the milk. Little black ants partook of the refreshments without being invited, and fuzzy caterpillars swung down from the tree to see what was going on. Laurie and Joe ate out of one plate. The china having run short, there's salt here if you prefer it. He handed Joe a saucer of berries. Thank you, Laurie, but I seem to be on a diet of spiders. Joe fished up a pair of unwary little creatures who gone to a creamy death. How dare you remind me of that horrid dinner party? when yours is so nice in every way. I had an uncommonly good time that day, and I haven't gotten over it yet. And if today's a success, it's no credit to me. It's you and Meg and Brooke who make it go, and I'm obliged to you no end. What shall we do when we can't eat anymore? Have games, of course. I dare say Miss Kate knows something new and nice. Go and ask her. You want to be with her more. She's company, yes, but aren't you company too? I thought she'd suit Brooke. But he keeps talking to Meg ... and Kate just stares at them. Through that ridiculous lorgnette of hers, Kate knew several games. And when the girls would not eat anymore, and the boys could not, they all adjourned to the drawing room and played rigmarole, in which Mr. Brooke, lying at the feet of Kate and Meg, and with his handsome brown eyes fixed upon the sun, shiny river, commenced the telling of a story about a knight who went out into the world to seek his fortune and discovered that several princesses were held captive in a ruinous castle, being kept there by a spell, and Kate took up the tale and betrayed the influence of the French novel she'd been reading, and it was then passed on to Meg ... who gave it a ghostly turn, and Joe transformed it into a comedy, and on it went, until it ended in nonsense and laughter. Time for another diversion, do you? No, truth, I hope so. I mean the game. What is it? Truth was very simple. A victim was selected at random and was required to answer questions truthfully. Of course, Laurie was chosen first. Who are your heroes? Grandfather and Napoleon. Who do you think is the prettiest lady? Meg. Who do you like best? Joe. Naturally. What silly questions you ask. Well, let's try again. This isn't a bad game, it's a very good game for you. Who's next? Joe is next, and Fred was quick with a question. What's your greatest fault? A quick temper. What virtues do you most admire in a man? Courage and honesty. What do you long for most? A pair of bootlaces. That's not a true answer. Try again. What do you want most? I want genius. Burning genius. Don't you wish that you could give it to me, Laurie? Then it was Fred's turn. We've got him now. Let me ask him. Laurie, you cheated at croquet, didn't you? Be truthful. Yes or no? Well, yes, a little bit. Meg, Kate, and Mr. Brooke, during truth, were camped a little distance from the younger ones. Mr. Brooke lay on the grass with a book when she didn't read. Miss Kate was employed upon her sketchbook, and Meg was observing her. How beautifully you do it. I wish I could draw. Why don't you learn? I imagine you've the taste and talent for it. I haven't time. Your mama prefers other accomplishments. I suppose so did mine. But I took a few lessons privately and proved to her that I had talent. Couldn't you do the same with your governess? I don't have a governess. I forgot. Young ladies in America go to school rather more than young ladies in England. Very fine schools they are too. Papa says yours is a private one. I suppose I don't go to school. I'm a governess myself. Oh, indeed. Young ladies in America, you know, they love independence as much as their ancestors did. And they're admired and respected for supporting themselves. Yes, of course. And that's very nice and proper. In England we have many most respectable and worthy young women who do the same, and who, because they're daughters of gentlemen and are well bred and accomplished, are employed by the nobility. The German song I sent you, Miss March did it suit. Oh yes, it's very sweet, and I'm much obliged to whoever translated it for me. You don't read German. Not very well. My father was teaching me, but he's away and I don't get on very fast on my own. And if no one to correct my pronunciation, well, as it happens, here is Schiller's Mary Stuart. And here before you is a tutor who loves to teach. It's so hard, I'm afraid to try. Then I'll read a bit to encourage you. So Kate was given the book and read from it one of the most beautiful passages. Her delivery was perfectly correct, but perfectly expressionless. Mr. Brooke made no comment, and Kate handed the book to Meg. I thought it was written as poetry. Some of it is Try this passage, Mary's Lament. Seated at her side, Mr. Brooke used a long grass blade to point at the words, and Meg, obediently following where the green guide LED, began to read slowly, timidly, unconsciously, making poetry of the difficult phrases, through the soft intonation of her musical voice, then losing herself in the beauty of the sad scene, speaking as if alone, and giving a little touch of tragedy to the unhappy Queen's utterance. If she had glanced at Mr. Brooke's brown eyes, she would have stopped short. But she never looked up till the passage came to an end. Very well done indeed. You have a nice accent, and you'll be a clever reader in time. Do try to learn German is a valuable accomplishment. And teachers and Miss Kate strolled away, telling herself that she didn't come on this little excursion in order to be a chaperone, though Meg was admittedly young and pretty. What odd people she thought these Yankees were. Being among them, she decided would be very bad for Laurie. I forgot that English people rather turn up their noses at governesses. They don't treat them as we do. Tutors also have a rather hard time in England, as I know to my sorrow. I'm glad I live here. I don't like my work, but I get a good deal of satisfaction from it. So I won't complain. I only wish I liked teaching as you do. I think you would if you had Laurie for a pupil. I'll be very sorry to lose him next year. He'll be going to college, I suppose. Yes. He's nearly ready, and what will you do as soon as he's off? I'll turn soldier, he will. I'm glad. I should think every young man would want to, though. It's hard for the mothers and sisters who stay at home. I have no mother, no sister, very few friends either to care whether I live or die. He picked up a dead rose and absent-mindedly put it into a little hole. He dug and covered it up as if creating a grave. Were any harm to come to you, Laurie and his grandfather would be very sorry. So would we all. Thank you. That sounds pleasant. Mr. Brooke was about to say more, but Ned Moffat, mounted on an old horse, came lumbering up to display his equestrian skills. In front of Meg, Amy and Grace, her new friend from England, observed the horse and were encouraged to share a mutual enthusiasm. Don't you love to ride? I don't. On it when Papa was rich, my sister Meg I mean. She used to ride, but we don't keep horses now except Ellen Tree. Ellen Tree, is it a donkey? No. It's an apple tree which has a nice little branch on it, and I put our old side saddle on it. Attach some reins, and Joe and I, we're both crazy about horses. We bounce away on Ellen Tree whenever we like. How funny, I have a pony at home, and I ride in the park nearly every day. With Fred and Kate and my friends, it's very nice. Rotten Row's full of ladies and gentlemen. How charming. I hope to go abroad someday. But I'd rather go to Rome than Rotten Row. Amy, of course, hadn't the remotest idea what Rotten Row was, but she wouldn't have asked for the world. Frank was sitting behind the little girls, and he heard what they were saying, and at the same time observed Fred and Laurie going through all sorts of comical gymnastics. Accustomed to being made much of at home, he pushed his crush away from him with an impatient gesture. Beth saw this and came over towards him. Can I do anything for you? Yes, talk to me, please. It's very dull sitting by myself. If bashful Beth had been asked to deliver a Latin oration, it wouldn't have seemed a more impossible task. But she couldn't run away, and there was no Joe to hide behind. And the poor boy looked at her so wistfully that she bravely resolved to try to What would you like to talk about? Well, cricket. I like to hear about that. And boating, hunting. Young Frank had not yet learned to suit his topics of conversation to his capabilities, and Beth, for her part, had no familiarity with the pastimes he mentioned. In her flurry and hoping to encourage a conversation, she forgot the boy's misfortune. I've never seen any hunting, but I suppose you know all about it. I did once, but I got hurt trying to leave. A confounded 5-bar gate. No more horses and hands for me. No, I'm very sorry, your dear. I think, are much prettier than our buffaloes." Beth was grateful that she'd read one of the boys' books, in which Joe delighted the prairies she found were of great conversational assistance, and buffaloes and such like were so soothing and satisfactory that Beth soon forgot herself, and was unaware that Meg and Joe were nearby. The elder sisters were surprised and delighted by the unusual spectacle of Beth in conversation with one of the dreadful boys. Bless her heart, what a dear, sweet thing. I always said she was a little saint. There were further games that afternoon, including an amicable croquet match, and at sunset the tent was struck, the hampers packed and boats loaded ... and the whole party floated down the river. Ned Moffat, becoming sentimental ... gazed at Meg as he rowed and sang, we each have a heart," alone, but he gazed with such a forlorn expression that Meg was moved in quite the wrong way, and spoiled the song. "How can you be so cool to me? You suck close to that starched-up English woman all day, and now you laugh at me. I didn't intend to laugh at you. I mean, but you look so funny." She knew, though, that with the memory of the Moffat party, in her mother's comments, fresh enough in her mind, she had in truth kept away from him. Back on dry land, the little group gathered on the lawn. Ned, in pettish mood, turned to Sally for consolation. "There isn't a bit of flirt in that Margaret March, is there? Not a particle, but she's a dear, a dear. If she is, she's not a stricken dear. At least this was an attempt at wit, and was as successful as most attempts. By very young gentlemen, good night, goodbye." Soon the group began to separate, and Miss Kate and Mr. Brooke watched as the first sisters went home through the garden. In spite of their demonstrative manners, American girls are very nice when one gets to know them. I quite agree with you, they are. Chapter 13, Castles in the Air. One warm September afternoon, Laurie lay luxuriously swinging to and fro in his hammock. The day had been unprofitable and unsatisfactory, and he was wishing he could live it over again, but differently. The weather had made him indolent. He'd shirked his studies, he tried Mr. Brooks' patience to the utmost, he displeased his grandfather, and he'd frightened the maid servants by suggesting that one of the dogs was going mad. After all that, he flung himself into his hammock to fume over the stupidity of the world. Until at last, the peace of the lovely day calmed him down, in spite of himself. But now where is he coming? I forgot the portfolio. Yes, but I have it now, and the hat on, we go. What on earth are those girls up to now? Laurie peeped through the meshes of the hammock and saw the first sisters walk through their garden, equipped as if for an expedition. Each wore a large flapping hat, each carried a long staff, and had a brown linen pouch slung over her shoulder. They went out at the little back gate and began to climb the hill that lay between the house and the river. Well, it's not very friendly, having a picnic, not asking me where are they off to. Are they going in the boat? No, they can't be. They haven't got the key, perhaps they forgot to ask. I'll take it to them and see what's happening. Though possessed of half a dozen hats, Laurie took some time to find one. Then there was a hunt for the key. He discovered it at last in his pocket, and by the time he'd leaped the fence and run off in pursuit, the girls were out of sight. He took the shortest route to the boathouse and waited, but no one came, so he went up the hill in order to survey the scene. Oh, there they are. By there, he meant a shady nook with a grove of pine trees, where the four girls were seated together, with sun and shadow flickering over them, and the aromatic wind lifting their hair and cooling their hot cheeks. A pretty little picture. Meg was sewing daintily. Beth was sorting through the cones that lay about, with a view to marking some charming items from them. Amy was sketching a group of ferns, and Joe was knitting a sock and glancing at a book as she did so. I ought to intrude, I haven't been invited. And yet he lingered because home seems so very lonely. And this quiet gathering in the woods So attractive to his restless spirit, he stood. So still that a squirrel, busy with its harvesting, ran down a nearby tree, saw him suddenly and skipped back, scolding him in such a shrill voice that Beth looked up and saw Laurie's wistful face. She beckoned him with a reassuring smile. "May I come in, or shall I be a bother?" "Well, of course you may. We'd have asked you earlier. Only we thought you wouldn't care for a girl's game. Such as this, I always like your games, but if Meg doesn't want me, I've no objection. You must find something to do though. This is the Busy Bee Society, and it's against the rules to be idle here. Much obliged. I'll do anything if you let me stay a while. It's as dull as the desert back home. Shall I sew knit draw sort pine cones? Or do all at once? I'm ready. Try me. You can read a story while I sew the heel of this sock." "Yes, ma'am." Out loud, I mean. "Yes, ma'am." The story wasn't a long one. And when you'd finished, Laurie ventured to ask a few questions as a reward. "Might I inquire, please, if this highly instructive and charming institution is something new? Shall we tell him? He'll laugh." "Who cares? I think he'll like it." "Of course I shall. I won't laugh. I give you my word. Tell away, Joe. Don't be afraid of you. The very idea. Well now, the Busy Bee Society is a plan we devised so that we wouldn't waste our holiday. We've each had a task, and we've worked at it with a will, and we haven't dawdled at all. And we're ever so pleased. Yes, I should think you are. Mother likes us to be out of doors as much as possible. So we bring our work out here, and we have nice times. But I must also explain, we used to play Pilgrim's Progress. We went on with it in earnest all winter and summer." "Yes, I know. Who told you spirits?" "It was me. I told him about it one night when you were all away, and he was feeling rather dismal." "A shame, Beth, that you can't keep a secret. Still, it saves trouble. Now for the fun of it, you see, we bring our things in these bags and wear old hats and carry sticks and play at being pilgrims, as we used to do years ago. We call this hill the Delectable Mountain, because from here we can look across and see the country where we hope to live someday." Joe pointed, and Laurie peered through an opening in the wood and saw the wide blue river in the meadows on the other side, peered far over the outskirts of the great city to the green hills that rose to meet the sky. The sun was low and the heavens glowed with the splendor of an autumn sunset. Gold and purple clouds lay on the hilltops, and silvery white peaks rose high into the light and shone like the airy spires of some celestial city. Beautiful it is. We like to look at it because it's never the same, but always splendid. It's like heaven. Oh, but heaven will be far, far more splendid still." "Yes, of course it will. It'll be so hard to get there though." "You'll get there, Beth, sooner or later, no doubt about that. I'm the one that will have to fight and work and climb and wait and maybe never get in at all. You'll have me for company, if that's any comfort. I'll have to do a lot of traveling before I reach the gate if I arrive late. Beth, you'll put in a good word for me, won't you?" Something in Laurie's face troubled his little friend, but she promised him that there would be no locks on the gate, no guards if people really want to get in. That said, if they really tried hard all their lives, they'll succeed. After these words of reassurance, there was silence, and then the conversation turned. Two castles in the air, favorite dreams and hopes. I want to be a famous musician, and the whole of creation will rush to hear me. And I'll never be bothered about money or business. And I'll just enjoy myself. That's my favorite castle. What's yours, Meg? What's mine? Well, my castle would be a house. A lovely house full of all sorts of luxurious things, nice food, pretty clothes, handsome furniture, pleasant people, and heaps of money. I'd be mistress of it, and I'd have plenty of servants. So I'd never need to work, but I wouldn't be idle. I'd do good deeds and make everyone love me dearly, and wouldn't there be a master as well as a mistress in this lovely house of yours? A master, yes. Of course he'd be one of the pleasant people. Meg, why don't you say you'd have a splendid, wise, good husband and some angelic children? Your house wouldn't be perfect otherwise, and you'd have nothing but horses, inkstands and novels, wouldn't I though? A stable full of Arabian steeds, and rooms piled with books. And my inkstand would be magical ... so that my works would be as famous as Laurie's music. And I wouldn't be forgotten after I'm dead. That's what I want to achieve. Something splendid and astonish you all. My dream is to stay at home with father and mother, and be safe and help take care of the family. Don't you wish for anything else? Since I was given the little piano, I'm perfectly satisfied. I just want to keep us well and be together. That's all. Amy, what about you? I have lots of wishes. The pet one is to be an artist, and go to Rome and do fine pictures, and be the best artist in the whole world. Aside from Beth, we're an ambitious lot, aren't we? I wonder if any of us will ever get our wishes. I've got the key to my castle. Have you? Oh yes, but whether I can unlock the door remains to be seen. I've got the key to mine, but I'm not allowed to try it. Hank, college my keys. A pencil, I don't possess a key. Yes you do. Where is it? It's in your face. Nonsense. That's of no use. Oh. It'll bring you something worth having. Just you wait and see. And he smiled at the thought of a charming little secret, which he imagined he knew. Meg blushed and kept silent, and looked across the river with the same hopeful expression that Mr. Brooke had worn when he told the story of the night. If we are all alive 10 years from now, let's meet and see how many of us have got our wishes. Gracious, how old? I'll be 27. Will be such a venerable party. I hope by that time that I'll have done something I can be proud of. I'm such a lazy dog. Mother says you need a motive. She's sure you'll work splendidly when you... Got it. I will, by Jupiter I will, if only I get the chance. It ought to be enough for me to please grandfather. But after I've done the 4 years of college, he wants me to be an India merchant as he was. And I'd rather be shot. I hate tea and silk and spices. Hate all those old ships of his. I don't care how soon they go to the bottom when I'm their owner. I want to break away from the old gentleman. Please myself ... if there was anyone left who would stay with him, I'd do it tomorrow. Sail away, Laurie. That's what I advise. Go off in one of those ships, and don't come home again until you've given your ambition a try. Show he mustn't talk like that ... and Laurie mustn't listen to you. You should do just what your grandfather wishes. My dear boy, try your best at college, and when he sees that you want to please him, I'm sure he won't be hard or unjust to you, as you say. There's no one else to be with him and love him. And you'd never forgive yourself if you left him without his permission. Don't be dismal, don't fret, do your duty, and you'll get your reward by being respected and loved like good Mr. Brooke. Ah, Brooke, yes. What do you know about him? Only what Mother said to me. She heard it from your grandpa. He could, it seems, have gone abroad as a tutor. Just some nice person, but he chose to stay at home because his mother needed looking after. And since his mother's death, he provides for an old woman who nursed her. But he never tells anyone. He's generous and patient and good. So he is the dear fellow, and it's just like Grandpa to find out everything about him without letting him know, and to speak of his goodness to others so that they might like him. Brooke couldn't understand why your mother was so kind to him, asking him over with me and treating him in her beautiful, friendly way. He thought she was just perfect, and talked about his visit for days and days, and went on about you all in flaming style. If I ever become rich and famous, you just see what I'll do for Brooke. You could do something now by not making his life a misery. And how, miss, do you know that I do? I can tell by his face when he's finished his tutoring. Well, I like that. You study Brooke's face, do you, and keep an account of my good and bad marks? I see him bow as he passes your window. But I didn't know you'd install the telegraph. We haven't. Don't be angry. And please don't tell him I said anything. It was only to show that I care about how you're getting on. And what's said here is said in confidence. You know I won't utter a word. I don't tell tales. But if Brooks to be a thermometer, I must make. Sure he is fair weather to report. Please Laurie, don't be offended. I didn't mean to tell tales and I didn't mean to preach. I simply thought that Joe was encouraging you to do something you'd be sorry for. Laurie, you're so kind to us. And we feel as if you're a brother, so we tell you just what we think. Forgive me, I meant it kindly. I'm the one to be forgiven. I've been cross and out of sorts all day, Meg. I like to have you tell me my faults and be sisterly ... and you in return mustn't mind if I'm grumpy sometimes. Keen to show that he wasn't offended, Laurie made himself as agreeable as possible and proved that he was a fit person to belong to the busy bee society by winding cotton for Meg, reciting poetry to Joe, shaking down cones for Beth, and helping Amy with her drawing. They began to talk about the domestic habits of turtles. One of these amiable creatures had strolled up from the river ... but their animated discussion was interrupted. It's supper time, we must go. Yes. May I come again? You may, if you're good. I'll try next time. I'll teach you to knit. There's a demand for socks just now. Our soldiers can't get enough of them. As they parted at the gate, Joe waved the sock she'd knitted, as if it was a big blue worsted banner. Some while later, when Beth played to Mr. Lawrence in the twilight, Laurie stood in the shadow of the curtain and listened, and found, like Saul when he heard David's harp, that his moody spirit was calmed by the simple music. And as he watched the old man, who sat with his gray head on his hand, thinking tender thoughts of the dead child he'd loved so much, Laurie remembered the afternoon's conversation and promised that he'd stay with the dear old gentleman as long as he was needed. I'll forget about the castle, he said to himself, and I'll make the sacrifice cheerfully. I'm all that Grandpa has. Chapter 14, Secrets. And he lay dead, slumped against the still unfinished portrait. The end. There, I've done my best. If this don't suit, I shall have to wait till I can do better. The October days had begun to grow chilly, and the afternoons were short. Joe, who was seated on an old sofa, picked up all the pieces of paper that were spread out on the trunk beside her, lay back on the sofa, and began to read her manuscript carefully, while her pet rat Scrabble promenaded the beams overhead. As she read, she inserted dashes here and there, and numerous exclamation points, which looked like little balloons. And then she tied a smart red ribbon around the papers and gazed at the package with a sober, wistful expression which plainly showed how earnest her work had been. Well then, she opened the door of an old tin oven, where she kept her papers in a few books, safely shut away from Scrabble, who devoured literature as keenly as his owner. And she brought out another beribboned manuscript and put the two of them in her pocket. Goodbye, Scrabble. Don't drink all the ink, don't nibble the pens. Joe put on her hat and jacket as noiselessly as possible and got out through window onto the roof of the porch, swam herself down to the grassy bank, and took a roundabout route to the road. Once there, she composed herself, hailed an approaching omnibus, and rolled away to town, looking very merry and mysterious. On alighting from the bus, she went off at great speed till, with some difficulty, she found a certain building in a certain busy street. This must be the place, I think. Adorning the entrance was a dentist sign, among others a pair of artificial jaws, which slowly opened to reveal a fine set of teeth, and then closed again. Joe looked up the dirty stairs, stood stock still for a minute, walked away as rapidly as she came, and repeated this maneuver, to the great amusement of a young gentleman who was lounging in the window of a building opposite. When she arrived at the entrance for the third time, Courage Joe, she gave herself a shake, pulled her hat over her eyes and walked up the stairs, looking as if she was gonna have all her teeth out. And while she was gone from view, the young gentleman put on his coat, went downstairs, stared with a shiver at the dentist's sign on the other side of the road, and waited in the doorway. In 10 minutes, Joe came running down the stairs. Her face was very red, and she had the general appearance of one who just endured a trying ordeal. She crossed the road and saw the young gentleman. "Oh, you," she seemed anything but pleased, and passed by with a nod. He followed her. "Did you have a bad time?" "Not very. You got through quick." "Yes, Lori." "Thank goodness." "Why did you go alone?" "Didn't want anyone to know." "You're the oddest fellow I ever saw. There are two that I want to come out." "What are you laughing at?" "But I must wait a week." "You're up to some mischief, Joe." "So are you." "What did you think you were doing up in that billiard saloon?" "Beg your pardon, ma'am. It wasn't a billiard saloon. It was a gymnasium. I was taking a lesson in fencing." "I'm glad of that." "Why?" "You can teach me, and then I can be Hamlet, you lardies, and we'll make a great thing of the final scene. I'll teach you whether we do Hamlet or not. It's good fun." "But the chance of playing Hamlet wasn't the only reason. You said you were glad." "True. I was glad you weren't in the saloon, because I hope you never go to such places." "Do you?" "Not often." "I wish you wouldn't. There's no harm in it. I have a game with Ned Moffat from time to time, or some of the other fellows. Oh dear, you'll get to like it better and better, and you'll waste time and money and grow to be like those dreadful boys. I did hope you'd stay respectable and be a satisfaction to your friends. Can't a fellow take a little amusement now and then without losing his respectability?" "That depends on how and where he takes it. I don't like Ned in his set, and I wish you'd keep out of it. Mother won't let him in the house, though he wants to come, and if you grow like him, she won't be willing for us to frolic together, as we do now, won't she?" "No, she can't bear unreliable, fashionable young men. She'd sooner lock us girls up in a trunk." "Well, she didn't get her trunk out yet. I'm not the fashionable type, and I don't intend to be, but I do like harmless larks now and then." "Don't you?" "Of course I do. Lark away, but don't get wild, or that will be our good times at an end. I'll be a saint distilled twice over." "No, no, I can't bear saints. Just be a simple, honest, respectable boy, and we'll never deserve you money. You know money's a great temptation if you haven't learned the right way to spend it. I sometimes wish you were poor." "I might not worry about you then." "Do you worry?" "A little when you look moody or discontented. You've got such a strong will that if you started wrong, I fear it would be hard to stop you." "Are you going to deliver lectures all the way home?" "Of course not. If you are, I'll take a bus. If you're not, I'll tell you something very interesting. I'd like to hear it immensely. I won't lecture anymore, I promise, so you must tell me yours in return." "I haven't got a secret." "Yes, you have. You can't hide it from me. Come on up, and fast, or I won't tell you mine." "Is your secret a nice one?" "Oh, isn't it? I've been aching to tell you for ages. It's all about people, you know, and it's such fun." "You begin. You won't say anything about it at home, will you?" "Not a word. And you won't tease me in private?" "I never tease." "Yes, you do. You're a teaser and a wheedler. You get everything you want out of people." "Thank you. Fire away." "I've left his stories with a newspaper man from the Spread Eagle." "Have you?" "Now he's to give his answer next week." "Hurrah for Miss March, the celebrated American authorist." "Hush, it won't come to anything, but I couldn't rest till I tried. And I haven't talked about it, because I didn't want anyone else to be disappointed. It won't fail, Joe. Your story is a works of Shakespeare, compared with half the rubbish that's published every day. Won't it be fun to see them in print and champ? We feel proud of you. Well, we'll see. Your secret now. Please play fair or I'll never trust you again. I make it into a scrape for telling. But I didn't promise not to, and I never feel easy in my mind. Till I've told you a plummy bit of news so. I know where Meg's glove is that all it's? Quite enough to be going on with, I assure you tell. Then Laurie told he leant towards Joe and whispered 3 words in her ear. She stared at him with an expression, both of surprise and displeasure. How do you know I saw it where? In his pocket. Isn't that romantic? No, it's horrid. It's ridiculous. It won't be allowed. What would Meg say? You won't tell her. You're not to tell anyone. I didn't promise. It was understood. I trusted you. Well, I won't for the present. But I'm disgusted and I wish I didn't know. I thought you'd be pleased. Pleased because somebody thinks he's in love with Megan. Wants to take her away. No. Thank you. You'll feel better about it when somebody comes to take you away. Oh, I'd like to see him try. So would I. I don't think secrets agree with me. I feel rumpled up in my mind since you told me yours. Race down this hill with me. You'll be all right. After that, no one was around, and the smooth roads sloped invitingly in front of her. Finding the temptation irresistible, Joe darted away, leaving her hat and comb behind her, and scattering hairpins as she ran. Laurie was the first to reach the bottom of the hill, and was quite satisfied with the success of his prescription. For Joe came panting up behind him like Atalanta, with hair and disarray, bright eyes, ruddy cheeks, and no signs of displeasure on her face. I wish I was a horse and could run for miles without losing my breath. That was fun, but I must have looked so silly. Be a cherub and pick up my things in no great hurry. Laurie departed to recover the lost property. Joe dropped down under a maple tree, which was carpeting the bank with crimson leaves, and she bundled up her braids, hoping no one would come along till she was tidy again. But someone did come along, and who should it be but Meg? She'd been making visits and was looking particularly ladylike. Joe, what on earth are you doing here? Gathering leaves, and I'm gathering hairpins. They grow on this road, so do combs and hats. How could you, Joe? When will you stop this romping habit? Never. Not till I'm stiff and old and I have to use a crutch. Don't try to make me grow up before my time. It's hard enough watching you become different all of a sudden. Let me be a little girl, please, for as long as I can. As she spoke, Joe bent over and picked up a leaf or two in order to hide the trembling of her lips. Lately she had felt that Meg was getting to be a woman all too fast, and Laurie's secret made her dread the separation that must surely come. And now that seemed very near. Laurie saw the trouble in her face and drew makes attention from it. Where have you been visiting Meg, dressed in all your finery? I've been to the gardener's. Sally's been telling me all about Belle Moffat's wedding. It was very splendid. And they've gone to spend the winter in Paris. Just think how delightful that must be. Do you envy her? I'm afraid I do. I'm glad. Why? Because if you care a lot about riches, Joe, if you care about riches, you'll never go and marry a poor man. I'll never go and marry anyone. And she walked on with great dignity, while Joe and Laurie followed, laughing, whispering, skipping stones, and behaving like children. As Meg said to herself, though, she might have been tempted to join them if she hadn't been wearing her best dress. You won't escape tired. No, I'm not. Whatever shall we do with that child? I refuse to be tired. I refuse to be caught. Caught you? Oh no. For a week or two Joe had been behaving so strangely that her sisters became quite bewildered. She would rush to the door when the postman rang. She was rude to Mr. Brooke whenever they met. She'd sit and look at Meg with a sorrowful face, and occasionally jump up and kiss her. Laurie and she were always making mysterious signs to each other and whispering about spread eagles, till the other sisters declared that the two of them had lost their wits. And now where are they? They've gone into Amy's power. Oh heavens, Will Jo ever behave like a young lady? I hope she won't. She's so funny and dear. She is. It's very trying, but we just can't make her come lafoul. A few minutes later, Jo bounced in holding a newspaper, and she laid herself on the sofa and affected to read, keeping her face hidden behind the open pages. Anything interesting there? A story that's all don't amount to much. I guess you'd better read it out loud so that we're kept amused and you stay out of mischief. What's the story's title? The Rival Painters: A Tale of Rome. I like the sound of that. Read very well. Jo took a deep breath and began to read. She read very fast. The girls listened with interest. The tale was romantic and somewhat tragical, as most of the characters died in the end. I liked the bit about the splendid picture. I prefer the lovers and their lovering. Viola and Angela were two of our favorite names. Isn't that odd? Who wrote it? But Beth already knew who wrote it. She caught a glimpse of Jo's flushed face. Jo sat up. Your sister wrote it. You. It's very good. I knew you'd written it. I knew it. Oh, Jo, I'm so proud of you, Jo. Show me your name. Here you are. Miss Josephine March. Good heavens. The ending, I thought, was very effective, though perhaps predictable. There are surely to be a sequel in which Angelo recovers his genius. Angelo's dead. Oh yes, but perhaps he isn't. Dear me. How delighted they all were. How Beth skipped around with joy. How proud Mrs. March was when she was informed. How Hannah exclaimed, sakes alive. While I never in great astonishment that Jo's doings. How the spread eagle, and might be said, flapped his wings triumphantly over the house of March, as the newspaper was passed from hand to hand. What will father say? What indeed? What will Laurie say? Laurie knows. He found out. How much did you get for it? Nothing, the man said. He doesn't pay beginners. They get paid if they improve. Good practice, he said, but Laurie likes the story. And when I write another one, he'll get it paid for, and in time. In time I'll be able to support myself. Be independent, help the family. Oh, I'm so happy. Chapter 15. A telegram. It was a dull afternoon in November. Amy was seated in a corner, making her little clay models of birds and fruit faces, which Hannah called mud pies. Jo had an ink blot on her nose, and Beth had drawn her attention to it. Meg was standing by the window, looking out at the frostbitten garden. November's the most disagreeable month in the whole year. That's why I was born in it. Yes, but if something very pleasant were to happen now, do you think it was a delightful month? I dare say we would. But nothing very pleasant ever does happen in this family. We go grubbing along day after day in the same old way, and with very little fun. We might as well be on a treadmill. My patience, how blue you are. Dear sister, no surprise though. You see other girls having splendid times, and you grind year in and year out. Don't I wish that I could fix things for you, as I manage for my heroines? Of course you're pretty enough already without my help, and you're good enough. What you need is some rich relation to leave you a fortune unexpectedly, so that you can dash out as an heiress. Scorn everyone who slighted you. Go abroad and come home as my lady. Something in a blaze of splendor and elegance. People nowadays don't have fortunes left them in that style. Men have to work and women have to marry for money. It's a dreadfully unjust world. Jo and I are going to make fortunes for us all. Just wait 10 years and see if we don't. Can't wait that long, Amy. And I'm afraid I haven't much faith in ink or dirt. Well, the pleasant events are happening right away. Marmie's coming down the street, and Laurie's tramping through the garden, as if he has something nice to tell us. And they both came. Any word from father? No, nothing. Who wants to go for a drive? I've been pegging away at mathematics till my head's in a muddle, and I need to freshen my wits. I'm taking Brooke home, so even though it's dull outside, the company might not be Jo. Beth. Yes, we'll go, and me much obliged to you, Laurie. But I'm busy. Meg whisked out her work basket. She'd agreed with her mother that it would be best if she didn't drive very often. With Mr. Brooke Mrs. March sat down and Laurie leant over her chair and gave her the customary affectionate look. "Can I do anything for you, Madam Mother?" "No, thank you, dear. Except you might call at the post office ... if you'd be so kind. It's our day for a letter. And the postman hasn't been. Father is as reliable as the sun. But perhaps there's some delay somewhere. Now who is this?" A minute later Hannah came in. "It's one of them horrid telegraph things, ma'am," and she held it out towards Mrs. March as if she was afraid it would explode. Mrs. March snatched it, read the brief contents ... and dropped back into her chair, as wide as if a bullet had been sent to her heart. "Read it, Joe, read it to us ... Mrs. March. Your husband is very ill. Come at once. Exhale blank Hospital, Washington." "Oh no, oh mother, I shall go, but it may be too late. Children, dear children, help me bear it. Oh mother, may the Lord keep the dear man. Thank you, Hannah, but I won't waste no time of crying. I get your things ready, ma single quotes am ... right away. Hannah's right, no more tears. We must be calm and think. Where's Laurie?" Laurie had been standing outside the room, feeling that the family's sorrow was too sacred to witness. "Here I am. Send a telegram, please, saying that I'll come at once. The next train goes early in the morning. I'll take it. What else can I do? The horses are ready. Leave a note." "That marches, Joe. Give me that pen and paper." Joe handed pen and paper to her mother and pulled the table in front of her. She knew well enough that her mother must borrow money for the long, sad journey, and she felt as if she do anything to add a little to the sum for her father. The note was written and given to Laurie. "Go now, dear, but don't drive at a desperate pace." "There's no need for that," but Mrs. March's warning was ignored. 5 minutes later, Laurie rushed past the window on his own fleet horse, riding as if for dear life. "Joe." "Yes, mother." "Run and tell Mrs. King that I can't come. Wait on the way. Get these things. I must be prepared to do some nursing and hospital. Stores aren't always as good as they should be. Beth, go and ask Mr. Lawrence for a couple of bottles of old wine. I'm not too proud to beg for your father. He must have the best of everything." "Yes, mother." "Joe, here's the list." "Thank you, mother." "Amy, tell Hannah to bring down the black trunk." "Yes, mother." "Meg, come and help me find my things. I'm half bewildered. I'll get what you need. A cup of tea first. I think you sit quietly for a little while." Then Mr. Lawrence came hurrying back with Beth, bringing every kind of comfort that he could think of for the invalid and the friendliest ... promises of protection for the girls while their mother was away, which gave Mrs. March great comfort. And in the hallway, as Meg was carrying up a cup of tea from the kitchen, "Mr. Brooke, Miss March, I'm so sorry to hear about this. I've come to offer myself as escort to your mother. Mr. Lawrence has commissions for me in Washington, and it will give me real satisfaction to be of service. They're to your mother." Meg put out her hand, almost dropping the cup of tea. If she did so, and her face was so full of gratitude, that Mr. Brooke would have felt repaid for a much greater sacrifice than the trifling one of time and convenience that he was about to make. "How kind you are, all of you, Mr. Lawrence." "Laurie, mother will accept the offer. I'm sure it'll be such a relief to know that she has someone to take care of her. Thank you very, very much."